Chapter 433. The bodyguard nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "Those bastards aren't just showing off. Apart from us, the other 3 armies have more or less suffered losses. In total, they have lost 20% of their men and wasted countless siege weapons. Those bastards who came to deliver the letter even asked me to intercede on their behalf, asking the marshal not to punish them. The victory at the beginning was indeed commendable, but it could also be divided into great victories and tragic victories. Lin Yuan asked Li Zhong to conquer the entire north instead of eliminating the rebels near the northern frontier. If he failed at the beginning, even if Lin Yuan didn't punish him, Zhang Qilan wouldn't laugh at him, and Li Zhongxing would be too ashamed to show his face in the future. Therefore, it was necessary to save men. Otherwise, if he couldn't conquer the north, he would have no place to replenish his men if he lost the southern expedition. The northern battlefront army on the northern frontier and the new army under the banner of the Fallen Star Army were all waiting to be fed. Wasn't it obvious that Lin Yuan sent him out at this time? Although Zhang Qilan and Li Zhongxing were each in charge of an army, they were both from Shenlin Jun. In this situation, they naturally worked for Lin Yuan. However, when Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing were competing, Lin Yuan couldn't use the officers of the Imperial Army to control his own troops, could he? Was he tired of living? After thinking for a while, Li Zhongxing shook his head with a chuckle and said, "These bastards are usually arrogant. Now that they are out for training, of course, they don't want to lose. In addition, it is their first time on the battlefield. They are eager to make contributions, so it is understandable that they choose radical tactics. Besides, if they only count the losses, do they have the courage to send me the battle report? Don't play any tricks." Ha ha ha. The personal guard let out a few hollow laughs. He didn't feel embarrassed at all because his prank was exposed. He continued, "Marshal, it's true that we have lost 20% of our 1,300,000 brothers. But, if we add up the surrendered soldiers that we have taken in, our total number hasn't decreased, but has increased instead. In fact, we are approaching the 2 million mark. How could there be no deaths in a war? However, a truly capable general could always increase the number of troops under his command as the war progressed. Now, not only had they won the first battle, the number of troops under their command had increased by 2/3. This was naturally a joyous occasion. In the end, as soon as the soldier finished reporting the good news, he realized that Li Zhongxing's expression had instantly turned gloomy. The smile on his face had also instantly stiffened. He did not know what he had said wrong to make this living king of hell unhappy. "I asked you to incorporate the surrendered soldiers, not to be assimilated by them. Fight according to this plan. After another 2 or 3 cities, I will bring my men to crusade against these bastards." Li Zhongxing glanced at his guard and scolded, "Tell those bastards to immediately reorganize their troops and cut down the surrendered soldiers. Kick out all those crooked people with bad records." Good heavens! After the first battle, the number of troops had doubled. If something went wrong later, who would be responsible? After the first battle, they still had to continue to push forward and incorporate the surrendered soldiers for their own use. It wasn't like they were going to drag them back to the northern frontier to slowly train and correct the bad habits of the surrendered soldiers. Had those bastards never thought that if the surrendered soldiers in their own troops had the same number or even more than the main troops, how would they end up with an explosion or a mutiny? Yes. I will go and remind them right away." After being scolded by Li Zhongxing, the guards seemed to have woken up from a dream. A layer of cold sweat even appeared on his forehead. Only then did Li Zhongxing nod his head, and a gloomy expression flashed across his face. He suddenly realized that Lin Yuan seemed to have dug a big hole for him. 3 million Southern Expedition soldiers was indeed a lot. The number of soldiers was enough for him to directly divide his troops and attack several rebel armies at the same time. However, even if these 3 million soldiers could fight all the way from the northern frontier to the Wei River, it was impossible for them to occupy all the territories in the north. If he wanted to control the territories in the north, he could only use the surrendered soldiers. However, the surrendered soldiers' military discipline was one thing, and the surrendered soldiers' loyalty was another. He wasn't sincerely trying to conquer the world for Lin Yuan. Although he was still in a dilemma, he still had to choose between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiusheng. If they were the recruits that he had personally trained, he would be able to execute all orders with a single order. When the time came, they would defect to the Xinwu dynasty or continue to listen to Lin Yuan's orders. It would all depend on who they wanted to follow. However, when the number of surrendered soldiers far exceeded the original southern expedition, it was hard to say what would happen. The rebel army had already shed all pretense of cordiality with the Xinwu dynasty. They only cared about their own interests and didn't care about the empire's reputation. Throughout the entire Xinwu dynasty, before the southern sea route was opened, only the northern frontier could export feies from the Hengduan mountain range and trade with the other 6 empires. The Xinwu dynasty was in chaos, and it could be said that almost every region was losing money. The front lines needed to be replenished, the equipment needed to be changed, the soldiers needed to be fed, and the deceased soldiers needed to be compensated. After the war, the various regions needed to restore civil administration, which was still a huge expense. Currently, the only place that earned money in the entire Xinwu dynasty was the northern frontier and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. It was all thanks to Lei Qiusheng's decades of hard work that they were able to maintain the chaos and not collapse. Who could give more benefits than Lin Yuan? The entire Xinwu dynasty was speechless. No matter how great the future was, it was useless. The other party had already rebelled. If they couldn't obtain any benefits, who would be willing to care about them? Thinking of this, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on Li Zhongxing's forehead. He felt as if he had been killed by Lin Yuan. There was a sharp blade flashing on his head. As long as he had the thought of betraying Lin Yuan, he and the southern expedition would immediately vanish. He had separated his subordinates and assigned them to be the leaders of the surrendered soldiers. Once they rebelled, they would definitely be unable to control the situation. At that time, they might not even be able to protect a part of the battlefield. However, if he gathered his subordinates together, they could only protect a part of the battlefield. When the Fallen Star Army came out of the northern frontier, the Fallen Star Army would deal with him the same way he had dealt with the rebel army. As one of the bodyguards of the 2 great generals of the Wanjian dynasty, the Fallen Star Army's training skills were no worse than Shenlin Jun's. He was now in a dilemma. If he couldn't grasp the proper measure of the expedition to the north, he would die. If he hesitated, he would still die. Unless he could really fully satisfy Lin Yuan's wishes and steadily hand over the entire north to him and watch him and the Xinwu dynasty divide the river to rule, only then would he be able to get a good end. Chapter 434. The northern frontier had sent troops to suppress rebels, and this year's taxes had already begun to be delivered to the imperial capital. The Black Jiao, who controlled the northern frontier, could shake hands with the divine martial emperor and make peace. It could be said that this was a happy ending for everyone. Of course, not everyone was happy. For example, the nobles in the imperial capital were worried that if Lin Yuan's new policies were successfully implemented in the northern frontier, then Lei Qiusheng would naturally have no reason to let them go. Soon, Lei Qiusheng would follow the example of the northern frontier and wield a butcher's knife against the nobles and nobles. The rebels in the northern frontier were not worried, because as the southern expedition had advanced in the past few days, dozens of rebel forces had been swallowed up by Li Zhongxing. They did not see Li Zhongxing really forcing anyone into a corner. Instead, after screening the surrendered troops, the elites were incorporated into the southern expedition and began the next phase of the journey. Therefore, many rebels in the northern frontier had lost the will to fight, and before the southern expedition came to attack, they had all surrendered to Li Zhongxing's territory. In any case, they were waiting for the Xinwu dynasty to quell the chaos before incorporating them. Now that there was an even thicker thigh to rely on, they naturally would not miss it. As for Lin Yuan's side, although Lei Qiusheng was worried that Lin Yuan would take the opportunity to control the entire northern frontier, Lei Qiusheng was not worried that Lin Yuan could cross the Wei River and threaten his imperial capital. When the rebellion was quelled, he only needed to issue an imperial edict. If Lin Yuan was not willing to hand over his territory, then he could directly label him as a rebel and punish him. When the time came, the Xinwu dynasty's troops would all come together, and this group of newly recruited soldiers would not be able to resist. Therefore, generally speaking, Lei Qiusheng fully supported Lin Yuan's decision to send troops to quell the rebellion. If one had to pick out a person who was the most unhappy, then it should be the Azure Canopy King, Lei Qiuming, who acted like a tyrant in the south. During this period of time, Lei Qiuming had not been idle. He had swallowed up the rebel armies in the south to expand his influence. In addition, he had over 300,000 regular soldiers as the backbone. Whether it was the progress of the army's training or their combat strength, they far surpassed the rebel armies. Even Lin Yuan's northern frontier army could not compare to Lei Qiuming in terms of elites. Of course, even if Lei Qiuming had a lot of troops under his command, he did not dare to casually send out over 1 million troops like Lin Yuan to quell the rebel armies around him. His main goal was to persuade them to surrender and use force as a supplement to deal with the rebel armies in the south. Although the development was slow, Lei Qiuming did not have the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. The Dragon Palace of the Four Seas would not give him face and allow him to open up the sea route for trade. He had so many people under him to feed and eat. Even if he did not move, it would be a huge expense. Therefore, compared to Lin Yuan, who wanted to take the opportunity to swallow up the entire northern frontier, Lei Qiuming did not think that he could take over the southern frontier. He wanted to join forces with Lin Yuan to attack the imperial capital and the northern and southern frontier, and remove the divine martial emperor from his throne. A single penny stumped a hero. This saying was most apt when it came to Lei Qiuming. However, even if he could not swallow up the entire southern frontier, it was not a problem to take the opportunity to expand his influence and territory. When the Xinwu dynasty's lobbyist came, there were no small or medium-sized rebel armies left in the southern frontier. There were only a dozen or so rebel armies left. They were all ruthless people with millions of troops. Lei Qiuming, who had a large number of regular soldiers in his army, was the strongest. Lei Qiuming had originally planned to slowly negotiate with the Xinwu dynasty to see what kind of price he could sell the foundation he had built. If the Xinwu dynasty offered too little, Lei Qiuming did not mind going one step further and even going straight for the imperial capital. However, before Lei Qiuming could state the bottom line in his heart, the great eunuch who represented the Xinwu dynasty in front of him suddenly gave him a crazy price. Prince Qingpeng has really shot himself in the foot this time. The great eunuch Tong Guan's lips curled up slightly. His fair and clean face did not hide his smile at all. He said in a deep voice, "You are still hesitating on what price to use to close the deal. The one in the northern frontier can no longer hold back and has begun to send troops to suppress those who do not submit." Lei Qiuming almost crushed the teacup in his hand into powder. He did not take the opportunity to respond to Tong Guan's words. However, his eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that Lei Qiuming's mood was not very calm at this moment. Therefore, the conditions that this servant previously discussed with Prince Qingpeng are no longer valid. Tong Guan shrugged and said in a shrill voice, "It is not that this servant does not want to give face to Prince Qingpeng. It is just that those people in the capital have been slandering the emperor recently. They said that as long as the Black Jiao of the northern frontier takes action, the rebellion in the northern frontier will definitely be quelled. The imperial court only needs to endure for a while more before they can mobilize troops to clean up the rebels in the southern frontier. It is just an evil beast. Does it really think that it is a famous general?" Prince Qingpeng's gaze landed on Tong Guan. He said with a dark face, "Just those child soldiers of the northern frontier want to quell the rebellion? It is just that those families in the northern frontier know when to stop and do not have the intention to bicker with the Black Jiao. If those families want to make a move, look at the troops of the northern frontier and see if they will immediately turn into ashes." Speaking of this, Lei Qiuming paused and hissed, "Eunuch has been with this king for half a month. Don't you know the situation in the southern frontier? These rebels in the southern frontier are not so easy to deal with." The moment he finished speaking, Tong Guan's expression froze. There was even a trace of gloominess in his eyes. The rebels in the northern frontier took advantage of the chaos and did not have the intention of pulling down Lei Qiusheng from the throne. They only wanted to take advantage of this chaotic world to let their descendants enter the military system of the Xinwu dynasty. If they could be conferred a few more titles, it would be satisfactory. Naturally, when Lin Yuan's troops arrived, all the rebels surrendered at the sight of the wind. No one was a fool. Of course, they were not willing to use their children's lives to obtain a chance to get close to the throne. Without that foundation, even if they sat on the throne, would they be able to sit steadily? However, the southern frontier was different. The rebels in the southern frontier had their own ideas. The southern frontier of the Shenwu dynasty was coastal. Even though there were countless unknown dangers in the sea, the safe sea route that had been opened up was enough for the southern merchants of the Shenwu dynasty to trade with the three empires and various overseas powers. Although this sea route could not be compared to the northern frontier that could directly communicate with the other 6 empires, it was still a legitimate treasure bowl. The rebellion of the southern frontier was fake. The real reason was to take the opportunity to eliminate their competitors. These people were not easy to deal with. If they did not obtain enough benefits, they would not relent. Chapter 435. Azure Cape King, aren't you exaggerating a bit? Tong Guan narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, although the southern aristocratic families are more troublesome than the northern ones, they don't have the guts to go against His Majesty. If Azure Cape King thinks that you can use the southern rebel army to advance your position in the imperial court, or even to raise bandits in Azure Cape, then you are gravely mistaken. Speaking up to this point, Tong Guan raised his hand towards the upper left side, cupped his fist towards the air, and said in a high-pitched voice, "A while ago, the envoys from the Blue River Empire and the Frost Mirror Empire came to our Shenwu royal capital, and asked His Majesty to give them the territories and people they had conquered. They also asked His Majesty to select a few princesses, infanta, and a group of beautiful young girls to be sent to their empires." Cold sweat began to appear on Lei Chuming's forehead. He and Lei Qiusheng were blood brothers. Ever since they were young, he had never seen through his temperamental brother. No matter how much advantage you had in your hands, as long as you wanted to use these advantages to pressure him and slowly suck his marrow, then even if his brother was beaten to a pulp, he would still bite off a piece of flesh from you. The Azure River and Frost Mirror empires didn't have the absolute advantage, but their armies could be said to be invincible. Although their armies could resist the attacks of the 2 empires, their own defensive lines were also moving back day by day. If this continued, more and more Shenwu dynasty's territories would fall, and the demands of the 2 empires would become more and more excessive. Even this couldn't make Lei Qiusheng bow his head, let alone the southern rebels who were nothing in Lei Qiusheng's eyes. "Eunuch, you can't say it like that." Lei Qiuming sighed and said, "This king controls the southern army like holding a piece of fat meat in his hand. No matter how you look at it, there will always be a little oil on it. That's why this king's army is well equipped and has plenty of provisions. However, have you ever thought about the fact that the other 13 rebel armies also have millions of soldiers? The various aristocratic families naturally have plenty of provisions, but where did their equipment come from?" As his voice fell, Tong Guan's face suddenly turned deathly pale. This was a deadly question. These rebels claimed that their equipment was obtained from raiding the city's armory, but these words could only deceive the common people. Although the south was close to the territory of the dragon clan of the 4 seas, the sea monsters were not interested in land and would rarely come ashore to harass them. Therefore, although there were troops stationed in the south, there were not many of them. This was also the reason why the south fell almost instantly when the dragon palace of the 4 seas rebelled. How many weapons and armors could there be in the armory when there weren't even many garrisons? If it were just a few million people who were fully equipped and had an abundance of rations, it would still be understandable. But those nobles in the imperial capital naturally wouldn't choose just one company to bet on. With Lin Yuan's example, everyone wanted to monopolize the profits from the sea route. This was why the tens of millions of rebels in the south looked no different from a regular army at first glance. If Lei Qiusheng wanted to pursue this matter, heads would roll in the imperial capital. Even the generals in charge of military supplies in the Heavenly Inspire army would not be able to escape responsibility. The first to lose their heads would be them. Once his nephew in the Heavenly Inspire army died, there was no way Grand Secretary Xia would let a small eunuch like him off. If the Azure Cape King insisted on pursuing this matter, who knew how many of those nobles in the imperial capital would be killed. Those who survived might not have the courage to oppose Lei Chuming, but wouldn't it be easy for them to deal with a little eunuch like him? Seeing Tong Guan's expression change, Lei Chuming raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. He said in a low voice, "Don't worry, eunuch. This matter is actually easy to explain. As long as eunuch can produce evidence and push the blame of the equipment and rations to those evil cultists in the south, it will be fine. When the time comes, those nobles in the imperial capital will cheer for eunuch. Even if His Majesty wants to pursue this matter, he won't be able to use his own people as an example. Furthermore, eunuch can use this matter to form a good relationship with the nobles in the imperial capital. Won't you be able to do whatever you want in the future?" Hearing this, Tong Guan's 6 gods, who were about to lose their master, immediately returned to their positions. He looked at Lei Chuming with a face full of hope. Seeing that the big fish had taken the bait, Lei Chuming sneered in his heart. However, on the surface, he sighed softly and changed the topic. But no one knows whether or not the evil cultists participated in this matter. Their actions are also secretive. Before their identities are exposed, no one knows who is related to the evil cultists. Or perhaps they themselves are evil cultists. Even this king, a vassal of the south, doesn't have much confidence in finding these evil cultists. "Eunuch, can you find evidence?" As his voice fell, the hope on Tong Guan's face slowly disappeared and was replaced by a cold smile. To be able to take on the same mission as Zhang Xiu, Tong Guan's ability and loyalty weren't inferior to Zhang Xiu's. Otherwise, Lei Chuming wouldn't have let him persuade his own brother, who was the first to rebel, to submit to the imperial court. In the beginning, after being tricked by Lei Chuming, Tong Guan was only slightly flustered. After all, he was only a eunuch. Whether he could accomplish anything depended on whether the emperor trusted them or not. If the crowd was agitated and the surviving nobles accused him of being a treacherous eunuch, even if Lei Chuming knew that these nobles were taking revenge, he would still be happy to hand him over to appease the crowd's anger. His mission was originally to negotiate with King Qingpeng, but after a few words from King Qingpeng, he already felt that he was standing beside an abyss. If he wasn't careful, he would directly fall in and end up with his body smashed to pieces. But when Lei Chuming continued speaking, Tong Guan realized that from the beginning, Lei Chuming had never thought of helping him push the blame on the evil cult. This matter was just a matter of responsibility. It was also a territory that Lei Chuming held in his hands to fight for benefits for himself. With him, the King Qingpeng, who controlled the southern military and politics, not to mention that the evil cult wouldn't be honest, even if they really didn't participate in this matter, he could still think of a way to pin the blame on the evil cult. If this matter was done well, heads would roll from the imperial capital to heads rolling in the south. It was just that the target of people's hatred would change from him, Tong Guan, to King Qingpeng. However, if someone were to hold a grudge against him, he would die without a complete corpse in less than half a year. However, if someone were to hold a grudge against the Azure Canopy King, then even if those aristocratic families, nobles, and sects of the south were tied together, they could only swallow their broken teeth. In the south, if anyone was determined to go against Lei Chuming, they would definitely be tired of living. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of thousands of regular soldiers would submit to him. Among the various tribes in the south, Lei Chuming's prestige wasn't as high as Lei Chuming's. Chapter 436. 2 flowers bloomed, each representing a branch. Not to mention the scheming in the south, the northern frontier was not very peaceful either. Lin Yuan sat cross-legged in the northern frontier prince's mansion in Shunning City. His pair of different-colored eyes flashed with a cold light. Li Zhong, Luo Su, Shi Dong, and Zhang Qilan sat in front of Lin Yuan on his left and right respectively. The atmosphere was very somber. Lord Dragon King, this matter is definitely not as simple as it looks. The land clearance has been pushed to the end. Even if the various aristocratic families are unwilling, they should know what is the general trend. For them to jump out at this time, either their brains are damaged, or there is a powerful force behind them. Li Zhong was the first to speak and break the silence, but his eyes fell on Sherdong. Sherdong frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "The Association of the Demon Emperor's people are all watching the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. Recently, the aristocratic families have all closed their doors to guests and have no contact with each other. In the letters intercepted by the embroidered uniform guards, there is no mention of the land clearance at all. I can guarantee that the aristocratic families did not communicate with each other." "Then you are all useless." Li Zhong snorted and said with a gloomy face, "The aristocratic families all moved in step and sent people to each new gathering place to collect large amounts of farmland, but they did not cultivate it. If it was just one or two families, it could be said that they did it on the spur of the moment and just wanted to annoy us. However, they worked together and did it on the same time. They clearly have other plans. You tell me, this is called not communicating with each other in advance?" As the eyes and ears of the northern frontier, the Association of the Demon Emperor did not send out any information in advance, causing a large amount of farmland to fall into the hands of the aristocratic families. Furthermore, the contracts signed were all for more than 5 years. Now that these aristocratic families did not cultivate it, it seemed to annoy them. However, if they did not hand over the food and phase, it was equivalent to giving Lin Yuan a chance to make a move on them. The aristocratic families in the northern frontier would not be so stupid. They wouldn't just occupy these lands and not cultivate them. When the harvest season came, they would transfer the resources from their own private storehouses to the storehouses of the various settlements on the northern frontier. If that was the case, why would the noble families do something that harmed others without benefiting themselves? Do you think they're really going to transfer supplies from their own storehouse to us? Zhang Qilin reached out and touched his chin. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He said in a cold voice, "How much land do they occupy? If they don't cultivate it, they won't get any harvest. They can't give it to us in proportion. They can only pay taxes strictly according to the standards set by Mr. Li before. I'm wondering if there's a problem with what they're going to hand in." "That's not impossible." Luo Su nodded slightly and said in a low voice, "There are field patrols everywhere. If they farm normally, they have to hand over our share after the harvest. This way, they won't have the chance to do anything." Sherdong shrugged his shoulders and smiled helplessly. "What's the point of that? Even if they hand in some shoddy old grain, it has to be something that people can eat. Year after year, it's still a huge expense. Even if the noble families on the northern frontier are rich, they won't do something like this just to disgust us, right? Aren't they afraid that we'll settle accounts later? What if it's not old grain, but problematic grain?" Luo Su tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair and sneered. "If the noble families on the northern frontier want to survive under the anger of the people, they have to rely on our protection. If they disgust us, we don't even need to deal with them. We only need to remove the ban and let the people vent their anger. They won't have any way to survive. Disgust us won't do them any good." "You mean?" Li Zhong suddenly stood up. A thin layer of cold sweat even seeped out of his white forehead. He asked, "Plague grain?" As soon as he said that, everyone's faces were filled with fear. Plague grain was a hidden danger that had appeared in every dynasty. It was a common method used by evil cultists. People who ate such grain would quickly contract a strange disease that no medicine could cure. Only the evil cultists who prepared the plague grain would have a specially formulated antidote. If they didn't take the antidote, they would at least die from festering all over. What was even more terrifying was that people who ate the plague grain would contract a strange disease. This disease was very contagious. In addition, the plague grain itself was also very infectious to other grains. Even if 1 stone of the plague grain was stored in the warehouse, it would cause problems for the entire warehouse. Although the 7 dynasties knew about the existence of the plague grain, they didn't have a solution so far. They could only strictly inspect the grain stored in the warehouse. Moreover, after the plague grain problem broke out, the dynasties didn't dare to publicize it. After all, if they couldn't solve the problem, revealing the existence of the plague grain would only make the people panic. It would make the evil cultists even more arrogant and give them a chance to recruit believers. It should be like this. Li Zhong's face was filled with anger. He growled, the aristocratic families are like this. Even if they have someone behind them, they don't have the guts to go against us directly. Therefore, their plan should be to use the plague grain to throw the entire northern frontier into chaos. At that time, whether it's disaster relief or searching for the antidote, we won't have time to take care of them. Only then will they be able to reap the benefits they want. At this point, Lin Yuan raised his head for the first time. His gaze also fell on Sherdong. Sherdong reached out to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. He said, "Everyone, please calm down. The so-called crisis and plague grain are just your own imagination. Without concrete evidence, what can you do to the aristocratic families? If there is no such thing, how will you deal with it? Have you considered all these?" Ha! Luo Su sneered and stood up from his chair. He waved his hand lightly and said coldly, "I don't do things based on evidence. When I go back, I'll capture a few of the aristocratic families' higher-ups and torture them. Even if they have 1,000 or 10,000 schemes, they'll have to spit it out." Sherdong also stood up from his chair. He looked at Luo Su, who was smiling coldly, like an angry beast. "Vice President Shi, what can I do for you?" Looking at the angry Sherdong, the corners of Luo Su's mouth curled up slightly. His originally bandaged face smiled even more ferociously. Now, 80% of the officials in the northern frontier are from aristocratic families. It'll be good if you can get something out of them. If you can't, how will this matter end? Have you thought about it? Sherdong slammed the table beside him and roared, "The entire northern frontier's administrative structure is paralyzed. Will you be responsible for it?" Chapter 437. What is your Demon Emperor Association doing? Luo Su maintained a ferocious smile on his face and said coldly, "Didn't you claim to be the eyes and ears of the northern frontier? Now the aristocratic families of the northern frontier are colluding with each other. It's obvious that they are plotting something against us. First you say that you have no evidence, then you say that you need to consider. If your association of the Demon Emperor could collect solid evidence, we wouldn't be sitting here wasting time. That's still better than your embroidered uniform guard coming to Xingyu prison." Zhang Qilan frowned and stood up as well. His sharp eyes fell on Luo Su, and his face was as gloomy as water. Back then, there was a lot of information in the association of the Demon Emperor that even Ding Zai and Sherdong didn't know about. It came from a group of spies trained by Lin Yuan. With the establishment of the embroidered uniform guard, most of these excellent spies broke away from the association of the Demon Emperor and made Luo Su the commander-in-chief. They formed a spy agency that could compete with the association of the Demon Emperor. After all, the investigation and arrest powers of the embroidered uniform guard belonged to this government office. Although the association of the Demon Emperor, which existed as the eyes and ears of the northern frontier in the past, was also doing these things, it was only in name. Therefore, when the same task was done by two groups of people, the former could directly get the support of the local government, while the latter needed to rely on their friends in Jianghu to slowly investigate. This was the essential difference. Everyone knew that the so-called mutual supervision between the embroidered uniform guard and the association of the Demon Emperor was deliberately pushed by Lin Yuan to compete with the association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard. He didn't want to let one side dominate. But even if everyone knew about Lin Yuan's plan, they didn't have the guts to say anything to Lin Yuan. The incident of the sect of the Blood Divine was like a loud slap on the face of the association of the Demon Emperor. If similar things happened one or two more times, Lin Yuan might even directly abolish the existence of the association of the Demon Emperor and disperse its members to various government offices. Whether they had a good future or not would depend on their own luck. Whether it was the newly established embroidered uniform guard that was determined to establish its power. Still, the various presidents and vice presidents who did not wish for the Shifter Emperor's association to be disbanded just like that. The two secret service agencies were bracing themselves to confront each other at the northern frontier. Both sides were staring at each other's movements. No one wanted the other side to gain the upper hand. As for why Zhang Qilan spoke, it was entirely because he disliked the embroidered uniform guards led by Luo Su. With Luo Su, a commander-in-chief who would do anything to achieve his goals, the embroidered uniform guards could be said to be extremely deranged. Anyone who was suspicious would be dragged back to the local prison and interrogated by torture. Because some local government officials did not cooperate, the embroidered uniform guards set up private prisons and execution grounds. The entire Yamen was filled with hostility. Although the embroidered uniform guards and the shifter emperor would fight against each other, and the security of the northern frontier, which Zhang Qilan was in charge of, seemed to be peaceful on the surface, but the undercurrent was surging in the dark. It was even a little jittery. The people at the northern frontier were angry but did not dare to say anything. They were suppressing their dissatisfaction. Sooner or later, there would be a big problem. And no matter what the embroidered uniform guards did, it was Zhang Qilan who would clean up their mess. Now, when the name Luo Su was mentioned in the northern frontier, the people would spit on the ground and curse him. And Zhang Qilan, who cleaned up Luo Su's mess, naturally got scolded a lot. Many officers of the northern battlefront army had complained to Zhang Qilan about it more than once. "I don't care." Luo Su sneered and spread his hands. He said in a deep voice, "You can criticize me, but you can't stop me from doing my job. When I go back, I will catch a few masters and interrogate them. If you want to stop me, you'd better find out the truth before I offend all the families at the northern frontier." As his voice fell, Luo Su swung his sleeves and walked out of the meeting room directly. "Lunatic, unreasonable," Shi Dong murmured with a pale face. The worry in his eyes was so thick that it could not be dispersed. After Luo Su left, Shi Dong and Zhang Qilan cupped their fists to Lin Yuan and walked out of the meeting room side by side. "They're all gone. It's quiet now. Do you have anything else to say?" Lin Yuan's gaze swept over Li Zhong's white and jade-like face, and his voice revealed a bit of indescribable laziness, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Li Zhong sat in his seat. His fingertips gently tapped on his knee. He said expressionlessly, "The embroidered uniform guards and the association of the Demon Emperor are now in a stalemate. They can't tell who is stronger and who is weaker. You can still live in peace. If you let go of the northern frontier, these two forces will definitely start a bloody and dark fight. By then, all the officials at the northern frontier will not have a good ending." "What do you mean?" Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong from the corner of his eyes. He still maintained his lazy tone. "Separate Shi Dong from the association of the Demon Emperor, which focuses on intelligence. Divide the intelligence of the northern frontier into public and private departments. The main force of the association of the Demon Emperor will be in charge of public transport. The private information that cannot be shared with outsiders will be jointly handled by Shi Dong and Luo Su. With the association of the Demon Emperor as the main force, set up a new government office to specialize in this matter. However, the personnel must be selected from the embroidered uniform guards. In short, in the future, Shi Dong will take the initiative and Luo Su will do the work. Vice versa. It's true that the two sides check and balance each other, but they have to know who is stronger and who is weaker. If things continue like this, everyone wants to suppress the other. I'm afraid that even they will not have a good ending." Li Zhong took a deep breath. There was a faint look of fear in his eyes. When living creatures roamed the world, no matter what the reason was, they would more or less have some secrets. The embroidered uniform guards and the association of the Demon Emperor were the kind of monsters that left no place to hide their secrets. When two terrifying monsters fought against each other, casually revealing some of their secrets would be enough to consign many people to eternal damnation. Go back and draw up a plan for this matter. Mention it at the next meeting and pass it directly." Lin Yuan yawned. He turned his head and looked straight at Li Zhong. "What do you mean?" Li Zhong suddenly shivered. He looked at Lin Yuan in disbelief. The conferring of the title of King of the Northern Frontier was not just a verbal announcement. One had to spend time and resources to prepare a grand ceremony to announce to the people of the Northern Frontier. Previously, Lei Fan's conferring ceremony had been held together with Lin Yuan's conferring ceremony. Although the scale of Hu Yan's conferring ceremony was not small, but because of Lin Yuan's restrictions, it was actually only limited to Shunning City. But for Li Zhong, the third king of the northern frontier, Lin Yuan was going to delegate his power to him. Naturally, he could not be careless or disrespectful. It was just that before the preparations for the conferring ceremony were completed, Lin Yuan had to show a moderate amount of trust and respect for Li Zhong. As long as it did not involve the fundamental issues of the new policies, even if it was something that Lin Yuan had discussed with Li Zhong, he had to let Li Zhong have some face. Chapter 438. You are the king of the northern frontier. Naturally, you should make the decision. Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. He sneered, Shi Dong and Luo Su have different ways of doing things, but they are both smart people. Even you, an outsider, can think of the hidden dangers of the conflict between the Shifter Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard. Can't the two of them see that if they continue to fight, no one will have a good ending? As his voice fell, Li Zhong's face turned solemn, and he stared at Lin Yuan. Shi Dong didn't say anything on the surface, but he didn't object when the matter of the epidemic food was brought up. He didn't mean to say that he wouldn't do it, but to remind you, the king of the northern frontier, that you should draw up a plan to appease the northern frontier aristocratic families. Otherwise, when the time comes, the aristocratic families will be implicated and there will be no one in the northern frontier administration. However, the matter of the aristocratic families playing tricks is the most important in Shi Dong's heart. He knows very well that you and I will not let the Shifter Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard continue to fight like this. There will definitely be a distinction between him and Luo Su. Then, this task that can affect the entire northern frontier is the best opportunity for them to prove their abilities. Whoever does this well may become the new head of the secret agents in the northern frontier. Therefore, Shi Dong said that the aristocratic families didn't make any moves, but after noticing that something was wrong, his people must be investigating this matter. As for Luo Su, I have never seen such a scheming person in my life. If he doesn't work for me, I must get rid of him as soon as possible. In terms of strategy, he is not as good as you. In terms of military strategy, he is not as good as Li Zhongsheng. In terms of governance, he is not as good as Zhang Qilin. Even in terms of investigation and arrest, he is not as good as Shi Dong when he just started. Now, he seems to be unreasonable, ruthless, and unscrupulous in his actions, causing complaints in the northern frontier. Even among his colleagues, he is not liked. But, isn't this just him tarnishing his own reputation? The playfulness in Lin Yuan's eyes deepened. He sneered, Luo Su is cursed because of his way of doing things. Isn't this what he wants? What he wanted to show me was this version of himself. Right now, Luo Su only has the position of governor of the embroidered uniform guard to protect his own safety. It would be easy for me to deal with him. If he doesn't listen, I only need to remove him from his position. In less than 3 days, Luo Su will definitely die a tragic death. The serious expression on Li Zhong's face turned into one of horror, and his eyes even revealed some palpitations. No matter how good Luo Su was at investigating and arresting, he had a thorough grasp of the thoughts of those in power. Luo Su was now living a prestigious life, relying on Lin Yuan's protection. Once he lost Lin Yuan's favor, he would immediately be reduced to a pile of bones in the grave. For those in power, Luo Su was a competent and easy-to-control ruthless official. No one would dislike him. But there are two sides to everything. Luo Su was able to betray Lei Fan in the past, and in the future, he would be able to betray me. Aren't the aristocratic families of the northern frontier also relying on our protection to survive? Now that they are playing with schemes and plots, they are not showing any mercy. So, Luo Su may seem easy to deal with, but when you really get into a fight, you will find that this fellow is a hedgehog full of thorns. The slightest carelessness and he will prick your hand full of blood. Speaking up to here, Lin Yuan suddenly opened his mouth and laughed silently. He said sarcastically, Shi Dong and Luo Su may not be loyal. It still depends on how you, the king of the northern frontier, are able to wield these two double-edged swords. Anyway, this is not a problem that I should be worrying about. You can slowly grind it out. Your student understands. Li Zhong laughed bitterly and clasped his fists towards Lin Yuan. Working under this black jiao, it could be said that there were surprises everywhere. It was true that the authority of the northern frontier king was given to him, but God knows how many more ticking time bombs like Luo Su and Sherdong were waiting for him. If he did not handle it properly one day, or if he was about to be abandoned, these things could easily take his head. The people under Lin Yuan's command actually all had their own thoughts and were divided into different factions. But when Lin Yuan used people, it was as if he was ordering them around like an arm. What he used was the individual selfishness of these people and the purpose of each faction to balance each other out. Li Zhong suddenly thought of the emperor's schemes that his former teacher had taught him. Now, when used on Lin Yuan, it was as laughable as a child bickering. What thunder and rain were the emperor's grace, what balance of power, Lin Yuan grasped it perfectly. Don't look at how Lin Yuan did not actually control any yamen in the northern frontier. These yamen were not even loyal to Lin Yuan, but Lin Yuan was able to make these people perfectly carry out his will. If there was anyone who was not convinced and wanted to rebel, they would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Li Zhong suddenly realized that Lin Yuan had planted a seed of fear in his heart at some unknown time. But even though he realized this, he still could not overcome it in the face of Lin Yuan's various methods and contingencies. Just like the present rebel armies of the Shenwu dynasty. They appeared to be very powerful, but they were all thinking of how to take advantage of this chaotic world to obtain some benefits for themselves. The only one who truly wanted to pull Lei Qiusheng down from the throne was probably the Qingping king. I have a general direction. Do as you see fit. I have to make a trip back to the Hengduan Mountains in this period of time. I don't have time to scheme against each other on the northern frontier. Lin Yuan gently waved his tail, indicating for Li Zhong to leave. Only then did Li Zhong stand up from his chair and walk out of the conference room. The moment the door of the conference room closed, Li Zhong leaned against the door frame as if he had lost all his strength. His chest rose and fell violently, and his mouth and nose panted heavily. His forehead was covered in sweat. He knew very well that Lin Yuan might not have returned to the Hengduan Mountains because he had something to do. It was just that as long as Lin Yuan was in charge of the northern frontier would not be in chaos. He was like a stabilizing needle, firmly suppressing those with ulterior motives and not daring to appear. Once Lin Yuan left the northern frontier, these invisible undercurrents would instantly turn into stormy waves that smashed onto them. The slightest bit of carelessness would result in their bodies being smashed to pieces. Similarly, Lin Yuan gave them a general direction before leaving. If they did their job well, Lin Yuan would naturally not appear. But if they did not do their job well, Lin Yuan could return with the general momentum and stabilize the northern frontier in one fell swoop. He would catch all those who jumped out and at the same time, reshuffle the current situation of the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. Advance and retreat appropriately without any flaws. This was Lin Yuan's path. All the reforms and adventures did not fall behind, but all the risks fell on their heads. As long as Lin Yuan still appeared on the northern frontier, it meant that the northern frontier could still be saved, and Lin Yuan would definitely be the victorious party. Chapter 439. The next day, early in the morning. In the newly built Anhan city on the northern frontier. Luo Su, dressed in a bluish-white robe and a black cloak embroidered with a dragon on the back, sat upright outside the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard. Behind him, embroidered uniform guards in red flying fish robes, blue Kirin robes, and yellow bullfighting robes poured out of the wide open door, their bright steel sabers gleaming coldly under the light of dawn. Horses galloped through the streets. Some of them were dragging well-dressed, fat people back to the embroidered uniform guard's office, while others were throwing naked people with disheveled hair out of the office. Although it was almost summer, the temperature was not too high. The northern frontier was known for its bitter cold, and the climate was naturally not as warm as the south. Although these naked people all had cultivation, their limbs and bones were controlled by special metal shackles, and their Jinqi and Gang Qi could only be trapped in their dantian. Not only could they not dispel the chill, but they also made their chests and abdomens feel suffocated. You are all people of repute. Not to mention in this small Anhan city, even in the northern frontier, your names can be said to reverberate like thunder. Why do you want to fight to the death with this commander-in-chief just because of a moment of anger? In a while, this street will be full of people. You certainly don't want to kneel here naked and be surrounded by people, do you? Luo Su gently patted the saber at his waist, his bandaged face full of a sinister smile, and said in a cold voice, "If you can't stand this hardship, you can tell this commander-in-chief. You only need to tell me 3 secrets, and this commander-in-chief will respectfully send you away. Another day, I will personally prepare a generous gift to apologize to you. How about it?" In Luo Su's view, although the aristocratic families were awe-inspiring, they had a fatal weakness: face. These naked people were naturally not ordinary people who had committed any major or important crimes, but the heads of aristocratic families within the sphere of influence of Luo Su's embroidered uniform guard and other lackeys. 3 secrets in exchange for not making a fool of themselves seemed like a loss, but Luo Su believed that there were plenty of people who would be willing to cooperate with him. As the old saying went, the aristocratic families of the northern frontier had multiplied and lived for many years, and any 2 of their children could be related. The aristocratic families were no strangers to each other's dirty affairs. Not to mention 3 secrets, they could even tell 30 secrets at their fingertips. But the situation now was special. The aristocratic families had to be of the same breath and branch in order to stand as an equal with the northern frontier prince's mansion. At this time, for the sake of face, if they flirted with the northern frontier's lackeys, they would certainly not end. Of course, to say that they stood as an equal was to flatter themselves. Although the people of the northern frontier had blamed the aristocratic families for the land confiscation, the northern frontier prince's mansion did not want to exterminate the aristocratic families, so it had been quietly downplaying the matter. Although the aristocratic families of the northern frontier were still hated by the people, it was not to the extent that they could not even leave the house like before. After 5 breaths of silence, seeing that no one spoke, the sinister smile on Luo Su's face stiffened slightly, and he said with a gloomy face, "It seems that none of the heads of the aristocratic families have anything to say. Okay, then we'll see you in the afternoon." As his voice fell, Luo Su stood up from the armchair, turned and walked back into the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard. 2 embroidered uniform guards guarding the door came up to him, one on the left and one on the right. Luo Su glanced at the trembling heads of aristocratic families out of the corner of his eye and ordered in a low voice, "The number of heads of aristocratic families kneeling here is at least 800, if not 1,000. You won't be able to get anything out of them if they are so stiff. After another incense stick of time, if they are still unwilling to tell me the secrets I want to hear, you will separate them and take them to various markets, city gates, commercial streets and other crowded places. At that time, there will definitely be people who will beg for mercy because of their face. Separate them and bring them to see me." "Yes." The 2 embroidered uniform guards cupped their fists at Luo Su and responded in a low voice. Half an hour later, Luo Su sat in the lobby of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, and a fair-skinned fat man wrapped in a messy cloth robe was brought up. Narrowing his eyes and looking at the other party for a long time, Luo Su saw some clues from the unkempt face. He sneered and said, "Isn't this the rich merchant of Anhan City, Master Wang? How did you end up like this after I didn't see you for a while?" Master Wang secretly snorted in his heart, but on the surface, he smiled apologetically. "I had a misunderstanding with the governor's subordinates." It's okay. The governor is now the favorite of the Dragon King. Surely you won't detain us for no reason, right? If this matter were to spread, it would be bad for the governor's reputation. We are businessmen, and we don't do things that harm others without benefiting ourselves. The governor should speak frankly. What do you want to know? The heads of aristocratic families were all prideful. When they heard that the embroidered uniform guard was going to take them to crowded places like the market, city gates, commercial streets, and so on, they were naturally unwilling. Although it was shameful to kneel in front of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, Due to Luo Su's usual violent style, not to mention the embroidered uniform guard yamen, even the entire street was filled with embroidered uniform guard cavalry or secret agents. There were not many people who dared to join in the fun. But if they were to kneel naked in the middle of a busy street, it was a different matter. At that time, the heads of the aristocratic families held their breaths and wanted to make a move. However, their cultivation and limbs were restricted, so how could they fight against the fiendish embroidered uniform guards? Many of the heads of the aristocratic families who rose up to resist were beaten up. Among them, after being beaten up, there were many who suddenly understood that Luo Su had made such a big move. It was definitely not just to scare them. If they did not take some goods from them, they would only lose face today. Tomorrow, they might lose some parts of their bodies. Therefore, Master Wang quickly adjusted his mentality and put on the face of a businessman. He understood that he just wanted benefits. Luo Su blew the tea in the cup and said expressionlessly, "Didn't I say? Each of you will tell me 3 secrets. What you want to tell me, doesn't it all depend on what you want to say? What do you mean by what I want to hear?" The smile on Master Wang's face froze. He carefully probed, then. "Commander, can I go home directly after I tell you 3 secrets?" Luo Su definitely did not have any good intentions. He had made up his mind. Once he got out of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, he would immediately contact the sons of aristocratic families all over the northern frontier. They would jointly go to the northern frontier prince's mansion to complain. Even if there was no result, he had to make a big deal out of it. At least, he had to let himself exist in the eyes of the public. He could not let Luo Su quietly capture him like today, or send a few secret agents to directly take his life. This move could also guarantee his position and show that he did not betray the aristocratic families of the northern frontier. He had just escaped from the tiger's mouth and was thinking of ways to rescue these old brothers who were still suffering. Chapter 440. Old Master Wang must be joking. Luo Su took a sip of tea and slammed the teacup on the table. He sneered, "Old Master Wang is an expert in business. Naturally, you know the principle of different times and different prices. I said before that if you told me 3 secrets, I would let you go. But you didn't cherish this opportunity. Now, why do you still want to sell the same thing at the original price?" Speaking of this, Luo Su lowered his chin and sneered, "If it was the same business, Old Master Wang wouldn't do it, right?" Of course, of course." Old Master Wang once again put on a smiling face and nodded and bowed. "I didn't expect the commander to be proficient in business. I'm impressed. It's just that I really don't know what the commander wants to do. Naturally, I can't open my mouth. Why don't you give me a few more pointers? Perhaps I just happen to know the secret that the commander wants to know." The embroidered uniform guard was such a large yamen. There were so many people in the yamen who needed salaries. Opening a private prison and making torture instruments all required money. The northern frontier Wangfu certainly couldn't fork out all of it. After all, there was the existence of the Council of the Demon Emperor eyeing them covetously. If the northern frontier Wangfu was too biased towards the embroidered uniform guard, the Council of the Demon Emperor would certainly not be willing. Therefore, it wasn't the first time that the embroidered uniform guard had captured people and extorted them from these aristocratic families. Old Master Wang naturally couldn't leave any traces of gossip and give Luo Su another chance to find trouble with him. He was as smooth as a ball. "Didn't I say it already? 3 secrets. Once you're done talking about this matter, it's over. As for what I want to hear and what you know, it has nothing to do with you. Do you understand?" Luo Su bent down, a playful look appearing in his eyes. He said, "It's just that Old Master Wang has been wronged. After you tell me the secrets today, you'll have to stay in the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard for a while. Of course, I'll take good care of you." Old Master Wang couldn't help but shudder when he heard that. Even though he had never stayed in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, he had neither eaten pork nor seen pigs run. That damned place was not a place where anyone could come out unscathed. In the dark prison, there were boiled carrots for every meal, and there were all sorts of torture tools and punishments. Even if the King of Heaven came, he would not be able to have a good life in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, much less a small merchant like him. If he could be caught and sent to the embroidered uniform guard's private prison, it meant that the cases he was involved in were all heaven-defying. 1 or 2 rounds of torture would not be able to get anything out of him. Therefore, when it came to interrogations in the embroidered uniform guard, they were particular about grinding. They had to grind slowly to get what they wanted. Under these circumstances, the officials of the embroidered uniform guard tortured ordinary people not for the sake of finding out the truth, but for the sake of torturing them for fun. They were all temperamental and difficult to deal with. When the prisoners who were caught had been ground to the point where they lost their temper and sharpness, they would naturally tell everything they knew. At that time, they could be forced to the Yaman's court to be interrogated. Therefore, outsiders often said that the embroidered uniform guard was easy to deal with, but the little ghosts were hard to deal with. Of course, the embroidered uniform guard's yamen was also a place that valued money. Even if you had heaven-defying cases, as long as you didn't rush them, the little ghosts below would naturally think of a way to squeeze every last bit of profit out of you. As long as you were willing to spend money, even if you were in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, you could still enjoy extremely honorable treatment. Even if you wanted to stay in a villa or watch a play, as long as you could afford it, you could still be satisfied. However, the problem was that the embroidered uniform guards' prisons, which required money to stay in, were all clearly priced. A cup of water could cost you 10 taels of silver, and a brand new bed and bedding could cost you 5 taels of gold. In old Master Wang's opinion, if he were to stay in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, regardless of whether the other party used lynching or not, he would still be able to peel off a layer of skin. However, Luo Su and the embroidered uniform guard's actions had always been so arrogant and despotic. Old Master Wang didn't dare to harden his scalp and nag at Luo Su. If Luo Su felt that he was being perfunctory, or even toying with him, then it wouldn't be as simple as bleeding a little. After telling Luo Su 3 insignificant little secrets, an embroidered uniform guard Baihu strode forward, grabbed old Master Wang's shackles, and brought him in the direction of the private prison in the backyard. At this time, another aristocratic family head was also led into the hall by an embroidered uniform guard, and it just so saw old Master Wang's back as he left. Pung! This time, Luo Su no longer had the insignificant attitude from before. Suddenly, he slammed his palm on the table beside him, instantly shattering the rosewood table into fine powder. Walking down the hall, he quickly walked in front of the aristocratic family head and kicked him in the stomach. With a cold face, he said, "You guys are really bold. If it weren't for the protection of the Northern Frontier Prince's estate, would your aristocratic family still exist in the Northern Frontier? What, do you have to go against the Northern Frontier Prince's estate?" The head of the aristocratic family, who had been kicked to the ground, was just about to get up when the embroidered uniform guard who had led him in quickly stepped forward and stomped on his chest. A copious amount of power exploded, directly suppressing him to the point where he could not even get up. Thinking of the change in Luo Su's attitude, and then thinking of old Master Wang who had just walked into the embroidered uniform guard Yaman's backyard, the aristocratic family head's heart suddenly thumped, and his eyes abruptly revealed a venomous look. He was now 80% sure that old Master Wang, who had just entered the backyard, had definitely said something serious to Luo Su. Otherwise, Luo Su wouldn't have directly dealt such a heavy blow without a certain degree of certainty. Huh, what is Commander Luo talking about? How come I don't understand? Although he had imagined a great drama of being betrayed by a traitor, for the sake of stability, the aristocratic family head still braced himself and planned to laugh it off with Luo Su to see if this matter could be covered up. You don't understand? Then I'll give you a few pointers. Autumn grain, arable land, land management. Luo Su's cold gaze fell on the aristocratic family head's face, instantly making him feel as if he was being stared at by a poisonous snake. After a moment of silence, Luo Su squatted down and reached out to pat the aristocratic family head's cheek. He laughed coldly and said, "Son of a bitch, do you think that the embroidered uniform guard is useless and that we can't even control your every move? Do you think that you can hide your little actions from us? Think carefully about the people who knelt in front of the embroidered uniform guard yamen today, and those who were later brought here. Wasn't one of them in cahoots with you? At this point, even if the aristocratic family head still had some delusions in his heart, at this moment, he was dealt a blow. His last line of psychological defense collapsed, and only then did the aristocratic family head kneel in front of Luo Su with tears and snot running down his face. Although he didn't speak, he kept kowtowing. Chapter 441. Nothing more than this. Luo Su sneered and muttered after his subordinates brought away the weeping master of the aristocratic family who confessed all his crimes. The disdain in his eyes grew stronger. Everyone was afraid of the aristocratic families. In the past, they were afraid that the aristocratic family's power was enough to overturn the entire northern frontier. Now that the aristocratic family's foundation was completely cut off by Lin Yuan, they began to fear that the aristocratic families would not be willing to submit and assist the king of the northern frontier. They were worried that any excessive action would stimulate the aristocratic families to stake everything on a single throw, causing the northern frontier to fall from a paradise to a living hell. However, there was an exception. It was not him, Luo Su. It was Lin Yuan. Although Mo Luo, who was by Lin Yuan's side, could suppress the pain of the purgatory flame, it did not eliminate it. Mo Luo still had to constantly guard against the invasion of the purgatory demon beasts in the Stoneclaw forest. Therefore, Luo Su still had to endure the pain of the purgatory flame most of the time. Every day and night was a kind of torture for him. However, Luo Su was not willing to die just like that. Therefore, Luo Su treated Lin Yuan and Mo Luo as medicine to delay the arrival of his death, allowing him to make a career out of this crippled body of his. All of Luo Su's crazy actions and unscrupulous means were all under Lin Yuan's tacit consent and even instructions. The aristocratic family's descendants worked as officials in the northern frontier prince's mansion. Once they became disloyal, it would indeed cause problems in the administration of the northern frontier. However, Lin Yuan was not afraid of these problems. These people were willing to serve the northern frontier honestly. Naturally, they could guarantee themselves and their descendants glory, splendor, and wealth. However, once they became disloyal, even if the Northern Frontier Army and the Southern Expedition Army stood on their side, they would still be like ants. What was behind Lin Yuan's back? It was the Hengduan mountain range. It was the demon beast imperial court. Even if the northern frontier was in turmoil, as long as Lin Yuan nodded his head, the demonic beasts would have nothing to worry about, and they could slaughter the entire northern frontier in an instant. A human army without sturdy city equipment was so vulnerable in the eyes of the demonic beasts. Even if they could not take down the human army once or twice, the demonic beasts, whose reproductive ability far exceeded that of human beings, would sooner or later slaughter all the rebels. After killing all these people, would there be no more officials at the northern frontier? That might not be the case. The Northern Frontier Prince's mansion was no longer a puppet organization under the control of Lei Fan and Hu Yen. With Li Zhong, the poor Confucian who had single-handedly plotted the calamity of the aristocratic families, there was no longer a day for those capable officials of commoner origin to make a name for themselves. Even if these people were unable to influence the entire northern frontier, but with the establishment of the Northern Frontier Academy, in 3, 5, 10 years, Lin Yuan would only have to worry about not having enough official positions in his hands, not having no one to use. Without destruction, there can be no construction, and only after chaos can there be governance. This was something that Lin Yuan had personally told Luo Su. If not for Lin Yuan's tacit approval, how could these demonic beasts that had been separated from the Demon Emperor Association be able to steadily gain the upper hand under the suppression of the various officials and aristocratic families, forcing Sherdong and Zhang Qilan to band together for protection? The change of authority in the northern frontier was very fast. In less than half a year, just the northern frontier king alone had changed 3 times, not to mention the other positions. This was because Lin Yuan was very clear that other than Li Zhong, who was from a poor family, Gao Buzhen, who was ostracized by others, and Yan Xingqi, who was filled with resentment towards Lei Qiusheng, no one else would submit to him, a demonic beast. Now, the northern frontier seemed to be as stable as Mount Tai, but in reality, there were many different factions, and everyone had their own plans. Under such circumstances, not many people could bear Lin Yuan's trust, and not many people could withstand Lin Yuan's test. Therefore, purges and changes became the main channel for the officials in the northern frontier. A batch of disobedient people would be replaced. Over time, Lin Yuan's subordinates were all from poor families, and could at least guarantee the most basic loyalty. At that time, whether it was the Shenwu dynasty, the northern frontier aristocratic families, or even the other 6 great empires, they could forget about meddling in the northern frontier. And at that time, Lin Yuan would be able to completely stabilize his position as the king of the northern frontier. Like Li Zhong, Luo Su was also very clear about his position. He was a dog that Lin Yuan raised. Whoever Lin Yuan told him to bite, he had to bite. Even without Lin Yuan's instructions, he had to monitor the entire northern frontier and collect evidence of everyone's crimes in case of an emergency. At the same time, he had to incite conflict between the various factions to maintain the main theme of the northern frontier's internal strife. If he wasn't willing to be an obedient dog, the pain of the purgatory flames burning his heart could turn him into a vicious madman at any time. What iron-willed and iron-blooded loyalty! Nothing was worth mentioning in the face of true pain. If he was unwilling to be a dog, then this was the only path to death. With the example of Lord Wang and the second head of the aristocratic family, Luo Su very quickly prepared the heads of aristocratic families who could not bear the shame and ran to him to beg for mercy. Confessions were signed and stamped, and embroidered uniform guards galloped out of the yamen. One after another, the warehouses and houses of the northern frontier aristocratic families that stored the epidemic food were seized. One after another, influential figures of the northern frontier were thrown off their horses. After all this was done, Luo Su let out a long breath. He sorted out the confessions and evidence in his hands and put them all into a black handbag. Then, he walked out of the embroidered uniform guard yamen and strode toward the gates of Anhan City. 4 hours later, Li Zhong, who was sitting in the Wang mansion in Beijing, received the official documents sent by the embroidered uniform guard yamen. After carefully reading the confessions and evidence, he let out a long breath and leaned weakly on the chair. He stared coldly at the messenger of the embroidered uniform guard standing in front of his desk. After a moment of silence, he frowned and said, "Your commander-in-chief did not extort confessions from these aristocratic family heads by torture, right?" Although everyone knew that the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard and the prison of the Association of the Demon Emperor were not places to reason, as long as one was arrested for committing a crime and came out intact, it meant that one had betrayed one's original companions and confessed everything that one knew. Even if one were to fabricate something out of nothing, it was not a rare thing in this kind of unreasonable yamen. However, it was clearly written in the laws of the northern region that anyone who was arrested and sent to prison had to be in the same state as they were before they were arrested, regardless of whether they suffered external or internal injuries. When the higher officials interrogated them, they could request that their previous testimony be overturned and that their confessions had been coerced into confessions by the yamen. Although it was true that Luo Su had seized a lot of epidemic food and warehouses, once the aristocratic family heads overturned their testimony, it was bound to turn this matter into a struggle between the aristocratic families of the northern frontier and the northern frontier Wang mansion. As time went by, any unforeseen event could happen. Therefore, even though he was sure that Luo Su was not a person without a plan, Li Zhong was still worried and asked. Chapter 442. Rest assured, Your Highness. How could our commander-in-chief do such a thing as lifting a rock and dropping it on his own foot? The messenger from the brocade guard laughed and explained Luo Su's methods. In the end, he said in a cold voice, even if the heads of these aristocratic families want to continue making trouble, the epidemic food we seized and the storehouses are all things that cannot be faked. If Hu Yen was still in charge of the northern frontier prince's mansion, they could still cover up their lies and push out some scapegoats to take the blame. However, our commander-in-chief said that Your Highness absolutely cannot do such evil things and continue to connive with these northern frontier aristocratic families. Very good. Go and receive your reward. Li Zhong nodded at the messenger from the brocade guard, indicating that he should withdraw. Luo Su's movements in Anhan City were not small. The aristocratic families of the northern frontier were likely to have noticed that their plans had been exposed ahead of time. At this time, they should not be trying their best to distance themselves from the relationship, or they should be staking everything on a single throw. Li Zhong was an expert in politics and strategy. To put it bluntly, let alone the northern frontier, as long as the officials under him could strictly carry out his orders, even if the entire Shenwu dynasty was in his hands, Li Zhong was confident that he would be able to govern it in an orderly manner. However, politics and strategy were purely mental work. If he were to be like Lin Yuan and be able to understand people's hearts to the extreme, clearly aware of his every move, what the chess player opposite him would think, what the chess pieces on the chessboard would think, then it would be difficult for him. Li Zhong did not have a good solution to the current situation. He could only hope that the aristocratic families of the northern frontier would know that their plans had been exposed and would do their best to distance themselves from the relationship. With the supervision of the Brocade Guard and the Council of the Demon Emperor, these epidemic food could not be transported to other places. Therefore, the aristocratic families of the northern frontier could only think of ways to destroy the epidemic food stored in their own homes. Without these life-threatening things, the two sides could slowly wrestle with each other. When the time was right, they could use a series of decrees such as business tax reduction to stabilize the hearts of the people on the northern frontier and let the officials from aristocratic families rise up. Everything would not be messed up, and things would develop in a good direction. Thank you, Your Highness. The messenger of the embroidered uniform guard grinned and bowed to Li Zhong. Then, he walked out of the door. None of the members of the embroidered uniform guard were officials. They were all spies that Lin Yuan had carefully cultivated from the association of the Demon Emperor. Without Lin Yuan's personal orders, even Luo Su, the commander-in-chief of the embroidered uniform guard, would not be able to command them. Naturally, they would not be interested in the king of the northern frontier. Moreover, he was very clear about his own identity. Even in the Brocade Guard, he was an existence that could not be brought to the table. At present, Luo Su and Li Zhong did not show any signs of discord, and Li Zhong had no intention of rebelling against Lin Yuan. Naturally, he would not cultivate his own henchmen in the Brocade Guard. Therefore, there was no need for the embroidered uniform guard messenger to kneel and lick Li Zhong's boots, and there was even less need for Li Zhong to be courteous to a messenger. After the two sides finished their official business, they would mind their own business. It was hard to say whether they would have a second chance to meet in this lifetime. However, before Li Zhong could relax, the messenger from the association of the Demon Emperor came to the table. Your Highness, there are secret treasures coming from all over the northern frontier. A large number of unidentified Jianghu people have committed crimes. Although the local authorities have reacted quickly, there are still many houses and storehouses that have caught fire. Vice President Shi has personally taken action. His subordinates have also gone to the prisons of the local authorities to retrieve the prisoners. Before leaving, he asked me to inform Your Highness and ask Your Highness to send the relevant official seal as soon as possible. After all, the messenger of the association of the Demon Emperor did not have an official status. Therefore, when he spoke to Li Zhong, he was kneeling on the ground. Are you sure? The news came from all over? Hearing the bad news, Li Zhong's face did not show much surprise. Instead, his heart suddenly sank as he asked in a stern voice. The messenger of the association of the Demon Emperor pondered for a moment before shaking his head gently. He said, there have been no secret reports from Taicang, Pingwang, and Min'an. Vice President Shi has tried to get in touch with them, but everything, including the messenger, has been lost. We still don't know the situation in these three cities. Bang! Hearing this, Li Zhong's face immediately revealed a look of resentment. He punched the table in front of him heavily. The Jianghu people committing crimes was just a cover-up. The truth was that the northern frontier aristocratic families had set fire to the epidemic food. With Luo Su's actions, the northern frontier aristocratic families knew that they could not do it. Naturally, they would not risk their lives to carry out this plan. Therefore, when he heard this news, Li Zhong did not feel anything. He even felt slightly relieved. However, there was still no news from the three cities. Even the Association of the Demon Emperor did not know about the situation there. This wasn't good news. Although the three cities were located at the northern frontier and were even close to the demonic beast forest, as old cities, they were one of the most powerful gathering places in the northern frontier in terms of population and military power. At the same time, they were also one of the most chaotic places. Now, all the gathering places in the northern frontier were rioting and arson. However, there was no news from the three cities. Obviously, it was not because of good public order. Perhaps the government of the three cities had already colluded with the northern frontier aristocratic families to carry out the epidemic food plan by force. They might even gather their troops and openly rebel. Otherwise, it would be a fool's dream to hide from the association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guards with the power of the northern frontier aristocratic families. Although the embroidered uniform guards had government offices and the association of the Demon Emperor had contact points, there were not many people stationed in these places. Most of the spies were hidden in various areas of the gathering places. There were people from all walks of life. If the local government had not mobilized troops to seal the cities, it would be impossible for no news to leak out. Moreover, the three cities were not newly established residential areas. They were three of the original 7 cities at the border. Aristocratic families stood in great numbers. Now that they knew that their plan had been exposed, they still joined forces to seal the three cities. Obviously, they were going to give it their all. The northern frontier aristocratic families were not worth mentioning in Li Zhong's eyes. However, the news from the embroidered uniform guards pointed out that there was another expert behind the northern frontier aristocratic families. It was Kong Lezin of the Four United Group that he had heard from Lin Yuan before. He was a terrifying existence whose realm was above the Kong Ming realm. Even if such a person did not play tricks, he could easily destroy the northern frontier with a wave of his hand. Moreover, he had no intention of finding trouble with Lin Yuan. Instead, he was secretly colluding with the northern frontier aristocratic families to put on a big show for Lin Yuan. Now it seemed that this Kong Lezin should be in one of the three cities. Who knew what kind of ultimate move he was brewing? This was not a game, but a real rebellion. Li Zhong was very clear that he could not make any mistakes. Chapter 443. Li Zhong rubbed his temples and said in a deep voice, "I know. Go back to the meeting point in Shunning City and ask if your Vice President Ding Zai has returned. If he has returned, ask him to come to see me immediately. If he hasn't returned, then wait for the news. When he returns, ask him to come to see me. There must be no delay." Since Lin Yuan had let Li Zhong know about the hidden dangers, he naturally had to give him a solution. Ding Zai, whose cultivation had suddenly skyrocketed, came from a force that was not weaker than the Four United gang behind Kong Lezin. Ding Zai had appeared once before, and after intimidating the aristocratic forces led by Hu Yan, he hurriedly left the northern frontier. According to Lin Yuan, Ding Zai had gone to call for reinforcements. If he returned, he would definitely bring back a powerful person who could rival Kong Lezin. Of course, neither Li Zhong nor Lin Yuan were gamblers who had lost their eyes. Naturally, they would not bet all their bets on Ding Zai alone. Before leaving the northern frontier, Lin Yuan had specially instructed that if Ding Zai had not returned by the time Kong Lezin made trouble, or if he had not invited a powerful person who could contend against Kong Lezin, he had to personally go to the mountain gate of the Blood Divine sect and invite Yang Qinglin, who had been deliberately weakened by Lin Yuan but had always been guarding the Blood Divine sect. According to Ding Zai's intelligence, Kong Lezin had a conflict with Yang Qinglin for some reason not long after entering the northern frontier. Lin Yuan did not have the confidence to make Yang Qinglin and Kong Lezin fall out, but he believed that as a powerful person who had reincarnated from the ancient times, Yang Qinglin had left behind countless backup plans and trump cards. Otherwise, his former enemy would have either died or become a powerful person that ordinary people did not dare to imagine. In the face of an opponent of this level, even an old monster like Yang Qinglin might not have much chance of winning. Therefore, as long as Yang Qinglin was willing to deal with Kong Lezin, the northern frontier could continue to be peaceful for a period of time. Although Li Zhong didn't know where Lin Yuan's confidence came from, he had already reacted. Yang Qinglin had been secretly plotting for many years. Even old demon blood Xi was trained by him. However, the divine blood church was about to be eradicated by Lin Yuan. Coupled with the special geographical environment of the northern frontier and the appearance of Lin Yuan and Kang Lezhen, the situation had become confusing. To outsiders, the northern frontier might be thriving. However, in Li Zhong's opinion, the northern frontier could be said to be in danger. It could be overturned at any time. However, Yang Qinglin did not leave the northern frontier even though his identity had been exposed. This meant two things. First of all, Yang Qinglin still had certain demands in the northern frontier. Before he achieved what he wanted to do, he would not leave. Second, the backup plan that Yang Qinglin had prepared before his reincarnation was in the northern frontier. Furthermore, these things gave him confidence that he could at least protect himself. Although Li Zhong knew that Yang Qinglin, a reincarnated demon, was coveting the northern frontier and most likely did not have good intentions, Kang Lezhen wanted to overturn the entire northern frontier and turn the northern frontier into a living hell. In comparison, Yang Qinglin could slowly negotiate. For the sake of all the living beings in the northern frontier, it was acceptable to sacrifice some people when necessary. Yes. The messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor cupped his fist at Li Zhong and stepped out of Li Zhong's office. After the messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor left, Li Zhong reached out and gently knocked on the table in front of him. A guard in bright silver armor pushed open the door of the office and walked in with majestic steps. He looked at Li Zhong with burning eyes and said in a deep voice, "My lord, what orders do you have for me? I'll have to trouble you to run an errand and invite Uncle Gao over." After Li Zhong finished speaking, he furrowed his brows imperceptibly. Then, he lowered his voice and said, "Zhang Qilin, I'll have to trouble you to make a trip there as well. Tell them to drop everything on hand and come to me as fast as possible. I have something important to discuss with them." The guard cupped his fist at Li Zhong and left after receiving the order. After all his orders were issued, Li Zhong let out a long sigh of relief. His expression was somewhat strange. According to Lin Yuan's original plan, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier did need to be taught a lesson. However, the profits that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could bring were enough to make these aristocratic families in the northern frontier bow their heads and obediently become the evil hounds of the northern frontier prince's mansion to deal with the dirty business. It was a pity that these guys were so insatiable. They felt that the benefits in their hands belonged to them. If anyone wanted to take the fruits of their labor, it would inevitably lead to a crazy counterattack. That was why these aristocratic families in the northern frontier were still stubbornly resisting Lin Yuan's rule. Although there were many aristocratic families in the three cities, as 3 of the 7 original border cities, the officials that Lin Yuan arranged in these 3 cities were almost all from humble backgrounds. They were people that Lin Yuan could trust. Moreover, the Northern Battlefront Army, the Embroidered Uniform Guards, and the Association of the Demon Emperor had arranged for a large number of people to be stationed in these 3 cities. In addition, there were also many demi-human tribes nearby. Once there was a riot, it would inevitably lead to a thunderous rage. Unless there was a considerable military force, it would be extinguished in an instant. However, the current situation was that the local government cooperated with the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. The Embroidered Uniform Guards, and the Demon Emperor pretended to be deaf and mute. Even the demi-human tribes nearby didn't send any requests to participate in the war. Li Zhong felt that anyone with a discerning eye could see that Lin Yuan had a murderous intent. He wanted to wipe out the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. However, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier didn't have a source of information like Li Zhong did. They were more willing to believe that this was because Wang Liu of the northern frontier couldn't catch him and Lin Yuan wasn't in the northern frontier. This was a sign that they were about to do something big. Thinking of this, Li Zhong stood up and walked out of the office. He said to the guards at the door, "Go beat the drum and raise the tent." The people in Taicang, Pingwang, and Min and cities might have rebelled. Although this king has already dispatched troops to surround and suppress the rebels, this king hasn't been in office for long and the northern frontier is facing such a big change. If he doesn't lead the troops himself, wouldn't it bring shame to the prestige of the imperial palace in the northern frontier? Yes. One of the two guards bowed slightly and quickly left the place. Ding Zai, who had just walked into the courtyard, narrowed his eyes slightly. As Lin Yuan's collaborator, Ding Zai certainly knew some things that outsiders didn't know. For example, the title of King of the Northern Frontier was unnecessary. The reason why Lin Yuan let Li Zhong inherit the title of King of the Northern Frontier was to use Li Zhong's hand to tell the people of the Northern Frontier that even if the King of the Northern Frontier violated the written laws of the Northern Frontier, he would still be punished. One of the rules was that the imperial palace guards were not allowed to leave Shunning City. Li Zhong was taking advantage of the opportunity to splash dirty water on him. Chapter 444. South of Shunning City, there was a plain 150,000 li away. Li Zhongsheng's camp. Li Zhongsheng, who received the secret report from his bodyguard, rubbed his swollen temples. His face changed several times, and he said in a deep voice, "What is the purpose of sending this news to me? I was ordered to fight against the rebels in the north, but I didn't say that I have to deal with the internal troubles of the northern frontier." The guard's eyes flickered. He reached out to stroke his beard and said with a smile, "Marshal, you're wrong. Now that the scale of the Southern Expedition Army has reached 5 million soldiers, there won't be any rebel army that dares to take advantage of this opportunity to cause trouble within 1,000,000 miles of the northern region. Marshal, you can let your men continue to suppress these rebels. But now that the northern frontier is in chaos, why don't you lead a side division to reinforce the northern frontier?" Speaking of this, the bodyguard's eyes turned cold. He said in a deep voice, "This is our best chance." Originally, the southern expedition from the northern frontier had 3 million soldiers. After this period of expeditions, it was estimated that only 600,000 soldiers were left. Now, the main force of the southern expedition was selected from the rebels. After simple training, they were not so elite that they could fight with any army without falling into a disadvantage, but at least they knew how to listen to orders and obey the command. They had the characteristics of a strong army. More importantly, the main force of the rebels were not from the northern frontier. Although they knew about the illustrious reputation of the Black Jiao, they only heard about it from hearsay. They did not have much respect for the Black Jiao. On the contrary, Li Zhongsheng, who led them all the way, was more popular in this army. The army these days was like this. The commander did not need to inform the soldiers under him. Li Zhongsheng only needed to leave the generals who respected the Black Jiao to continue fighting against the rebels, and he personally led the rebels and the new army to the northern frontier. When the time came, they would join the army of the aristocratic families, Shen Lin Jun's reserves, and even Zhang Qilan's confidants. Then, they would succeed. Even if the Black Jiao wanted to retaliate, the Shenwu dynasty would definitely send an elite army and some high-level cultivators to support the northern frontier after receiving the news. The Black Jiao, who had become Lei Qiusheng's mortal enemy, would be firmly pressed into the Hengduan Mountains. They would not give the Black Jiao any chance to cause trouble again. Pa! It was not Li Zhongsheng's hesitant or resolute voice that responded to the bodyguard. Instead, it was a sharp and loud crack of the horsewhip. The whip heavily hit the guard's face, waking him up from his beautiful dream. He looked at Li Zhongsheng in disbelief. "Although I'm not a famous general, I'm not so stupid as to be played in the palm of someone's hand. Do you really think that you've hidden your dirty dealings with the aristocratic families of the northern region so well that no one knows about it?" Li Zhongsheng whipped the guard and mounted his horse with a disgusted expression. He said coldly, "Before I left the northern frontier, I was indeed a little hesitant. After all, for so many years, His Majesty had been in charge of the imperial capital, and the aristocratic families had cooperated with the government to govern the place. Although there were many filthy things, it was still a scene of peace. However, after leaving the northern frontier, I was shocked by what I saw and heard." "Commander," only then did the guard come back to his senses. He opened his mouth, but he did not know what to say. After all, the northern frontier was a paradise. It was not said by his own people, but by the refugees who had fled to the northern frontier. The people of the northern frontier even disapproved of it. After all, other than the chaos when the demonic beasts attacked the city, they had been living under the protection of Lin Yuan for so long. Naturally, they had not experienced what kind of purgatory the outside world was. Just by pooling money and food from a few local aristocratic families, they could support a rebel army of more than 100,000 people. Large and small warlords fought and swallowed each other on this piece of land. Small warlords became big warlords, and the aristocratic families could not afford to support them. They occupied the land and called themselves kings, learning from the imperial court and collecting taxes and food from the people in their territory. They even took away the taxes and food that would be collected decades later. To put it nicely, it was collecting taxes, but to put it bluntly, it was robbing. But that was not the main point. If you want to rob, then rob. At the very least, you have to ensure that there is peace, right? But not all rebel armies had the strength of a regular army. When several factions fought against each other, the stronger ones would still be fine, but the weaker ones would be beaten back repeatedly. It was not rare for a city to change hands several times, and the people in these cities would have to pay taxes several times a day. Even the aristocratic families would not be able to handle it, not to mention the commoners. The roadside would be littered with bones. Although everyone knew that the northern frontier was a paradise, in the chaos of war, even if they did not go out, disaster could befall them, not to mention taking the risk to migrate to the northern frontier. Even if they had the idea, they did not have the ability to do so. Furthermore, the one controlling the northern frontier was a demonic beast. In the environment of the Sky Martial continent, not only were demonic beasts hostile to humans, humans were also hostile to demonic beasts. They did not think that the Black Jiao would be like what the rumors said, worrying that they would be reduced to food for demonic beasts if they took the risk to go to the northern frontier. You aristocratic family's disciples are all ungrateful wretches, hiding the wild ambitions in your hearts all day long, scheming and scheming in order to obtain more benefits for yourself. But no one has ever thought about whether the commoners will be able to survive. In this aspect, even a demonic beast can do better than you. Don't you feel ashamed? Li Zhongsheng, who was riding on horseback, spat out a mouthful of saliva in disgust and said coldly, "I'm ashamed to be in the same group as you." The main reason why Li Zhongsheng was hesitant to betray Lin Yuan was because the commoners of the northern frontier were living in peace and contentment. But the aristocratic families of the northern frontier wanted to drag the northern frontier into the flames of war for their own benefits. This had undoubtedly violated Li Zhongsheng's bottom line, and at the same time, strengthened the idea in Li Zhongsheng's heart. The world was already like this, it was fucking revolting. If Lin Yuan really had the disposition of a mighty ruler, the northern frontier would naturally not be able to restrict his steps. Even the entire north, in Lin Yuan's eyes, was just a stepping stone. If the commoners of the world could be as peaceful as the northern frontier, even if he carried the infamy of a traitor in the Shenwu dynasty, what could he do? Without waiting for the personal guard to struggle, Li Zhongsheng urged his horse forward, and immediately, 7 to 8 military judges holding long swords surrounded him. The leading military judge looked at the personal guard with a smile that was not a smile, and sneered, "This young master, please." The third son of the Su family head of Taizong, rarely known for his talent, but today, it seems that he is only a so-so. But it has really been difficult for you, to actually be able to disguise yourself as a scoundrel and sneak into the southern expedition, and even become Marshal Li's personal guard. Chapter 445. At this point, the military judge took 2 steps forward and pierced third young Master Su's abdomen with his saber. He then took 2 steps closer and said in a low voice, "My commander-in-chief asked me to thank third young Master Su on his behalf. If it weren't for you, Commander Li might really have sided with the Shenwu dynasty." Third young Master Su's pupils shrank to the size of needles. Now that things had come to this, how could he not know that he had been schemed against? In the entire northern frontier, the only person who could be called commander-in-chief was Luo Su, who had single-handedly suppressed the aristocratic families of the northern frontier and the association of the Demon Emperor. His identity had probably been thoroughly investigated by the spies of the embroidered uniform guard before he had entered the southern expedition. Even the troubles he had encountered when he had been promoted had been dealt with by the embroidered uniform guard in secret. Their goal had been to persuade Li Zhongxing to attack the northern frontier's prince's mansion and provoke Li Zhongxing's anger and rebellious mentality. Third young Master Su was just about to speak when the military judge covered his mouth with one hand. The other hand that was holding the saber suddenly twisted and opened a huge bloody hole in third young Master Su's abdomen. Fresh blood spurted out and splattered all over his body. The military judge did not relax at all. The two of them maintained this position until third young Master Su's eyes dimmed and his body became slightly stiff. Only then did the military judge withdraw his saber and retreat. He waved his hand to summon a military judge beside him and said slowly, "Find an opportunity to leave the army and return to Anhan City to report that the southern expedition's disaster has been eliminated and that there won't be any more changes in the short term. I will continue to follow Li Zhongxing's trail." "Yes, Lord Qianhu." The military judge who was summoned had a solemn expression and replied in a low voice. The embroidered uniform guard and the association of the Demon Emperor had managed the northern frontier so well that even if the spies of the embroidered uniform guard managed to infiltrate, they wouldn't dare act rashly without receiving orders from their superiors. However, outside of Shunning City was the territory of the elites of the embroidered uniform guard for many years. Even in Li Zhongxing's southern expedition, who knew how many spies of the embroidered uniform guard had infiltrated? Therefore, the information regarding third young Master Su was quickly sent to Lei Qiusheng. After reading the entire story, Lei Qiusheng's face immediately flushed red. Even smashing the 4 treasures of the study and all kinds of ornaments into pieces was not enough to vent his anger. It was only when the entire imperial study was smashed into ruins that Lei Qiusheng stormed out of the imperial study. On both sides of the imperial path were eunuchs and palace maids kneeling on the ground. They were all trembling and did not dare to look directly at Lei Qiusheng. The only one who was still standing was Zhang Xiu, who was dragged over by the head eunuch to save the situation. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." Zhang Xiu took off the black pointed hat on his head. His fair face was filled with exhaustion. The northern frontier is just a small storm. With that Black Jiao's methods, he will be able to quickly deal with these troubles. Because they had reached an agreement with Lin Yuan, the embroidered uniform guard could now begin to send spies to the northern frontier. Even though the names and identities of these spies were in Lin Yuan's hands, the spies that had been hiding in the northern frontier could now be put to use again. Moreover, there was no need to worry about the embroidered uniform guard in the future. In order for this matter to meet his expectations, Zhang Xiu had been rushing between the various cities in the north. He had just finished his tasks and returned to the imperial capital. Before he could rest, he suddenly heard that the spies under his command had sent the information regarding the northern frontier to Lei Qiusheng's imperial desk. He immediately turned pale with fright and rushed to the imperial capital without stopping. However, he was still a step too late. By the time he arrived, Lei Qiusheng had already smashed most of the ornaments in the imperial study. He still showed no signs of calming down. Just from Lei Qiusheng's reaction, Zhang Xiu knew that this tyrannical emperor was going to bring up the decree that she had been persuaded to issue when she had first ascended to the throne. "Zhang Xiu, you are a close official by this humble one's side. Do you really think that this humble one will be able to quell his anger at this time?" Lei Qiusheng stared at Zhang Xiu with bloodshot eyes like a fierce tiger choosing its prey. He roared, "This humble one knows that the aristocratic families of the various lands want to take advantage of this time to eliminate their enemies so that they can occupy more territory and allow their descendants to smoothly enter the Shenwu dynasty's military system. This humble one knows all of this, so this humble one can tolerate the existence of rebel armies. As long as they don't send troops to attack the imperial capital, this humble one will not go too far." But now, Lei Qiusheng's angry voice echoed in the surroundings. In just a moment, his face was already flushed red. However, he continued to roar, "Even if this humble one wishes that Black Jiao to die early, as the ruler, I have to say that it has done well. Taking away the lands in the hands of the aristocratic families is removing their claws and fangs. This humble one does not believe that the profits that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce brings to them can't compare to the few pieces of land in their hands. However, what is their choice? They still choose to play petty tricks. They even did not hesitate to overturn the northern frontier in hopes of driving out the Black Jiao and its northern frontier king. They want the northern frontier to return to its former state. This clearly shows that they have not given up on their desire to be a subject. Without land, no matter how much money they had, they might not be able to buy enough food during a rebellion. If there was another time of chaos, the aristocratic families would not be able to support an army. They would not be able to wantonly wipe out their enemies like they were today and use the simplest and most brutal methods to obtain profits. However, if one were to talk about profits, the income that the few pieces of land in the northern frontier could bring in a year was not even 1/10,000th of what the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could bring in. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not to be underestimated. As the only profitable project that Lin Yuan had at hand, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could afford to pay the salaries of all the officials in the northern frontier and the replacement of the soldiers' equipment. Even the reform of the northern frontier and the establishment of new colonies were all provided by the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Furthermore, even after being squeezed to this extent, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce still had the ability to provide for the northern frontier aristocratic families. There was almost no business in the world that was more profitable than the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. When ordinary people saw the northern frontier aristocratic families rebelling, they might just think that they were going all out and were unable to swallow the anger of being suppressed. However, in the eyes of a wise ruler like Lei Qiusheng, it was obvious that the northern frontier aristocratic families did not want to lose the provisions that were provided to their private armies every year in preparation for a time of chaos. Lin Yuan's point of view was similar to Lei Qiusheng's. In fact, Lin Yuan was even angrier. This was because he had already given the northern frontier aristocratic families enough face and given them a chance. However, now they did not even talk about profits. Not only did they wipe their mouths and not acknowledge the debt, they even wanted to seize the opportunity to occupy the entire northern frontier and control the operations of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Chapter 446. Your Majesty, anger will not solve the problem. On the contrary, it will make you lose your rationality and make things even more troublesome. Zhang Xiu's pale forehead was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. He lowered his voice and said, "That Black Jiao has already destroyed the courage of those people on the northern frontier. On the surface, they don't care about life and death and want to fight with the Black Jiao, but in reality, they are certain that the Black Jiao will not do anything to them on account of the fact that most of the officials on the northern frontier are from noble families." Lei Qiusheng narrowed his eyes slightly, his gaze pausing on Zhang Xiu's face. He did not understand why Zhang Xiu would say such words that boosted the morale of others and destroyed his own prestige. Even if he was the nominal ruler of the northern frontier and could not tolerate a monster overstepping his control of the northern frontier, Lei Qiusheng could not tolerate the fact that these noble families were not loyal to him. If possible, he even wanted to lead his army north to reinforce the northern frontier and destroy the prestige of these noble families on the northern frontier. However, the Black Jiao is not an ordinary person. He is a true hero with the characteristics of an emperor. He will not be troubled by temporary difficulties. Now that the noble families on the northern frontier have shed all pretense of cordiality, the Black Jiao will not show any mercy. All the noble families on the northern frontier who participated in the rebellion will definitely be cleansed by the northern frontier prince's estate. Even those who did not participate in the rebellion will not be able to escape the pursuit of the northern frontier prince's estate as long as they are found to be related to this matter. None of them will have a good ending. I am telling your Majesty this not to boost the morale of others and destroy our own prestige, but to tell your Majesty a simple thing. That is, the Black Jiao can do these things, but your Majesty cannot. If you want to deal with the current situation with the policy of cleansing the noble families and sects after ascending to the throne, I am afraid that not only will the nobles and officials dissuade you, but it will also greatly affect the current situation. Even the rebel army will unite and attack the imperial city together to pull you down from the throne. With a bitter smile on his face, Zhang Xiu continued, the Black Jiao has been preparing for this for a long time. First, he used the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce as bait to entice the noble families on the northern frontier to help the sections. After eliminating the sects, he used Li Zhong to plot against the noble families on the northern frontier. Even though he has made many preparations, Lin Yuan still has no intention of letting the noble families on the northern frontier go. In Lin Yuan's eyes, the noble families on the northern frontier were not a threat. They were not even existences that had to be eradicated. As long as the noble families were obedient, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could easily let them make a lot of money. However, Lin Yuan had already given the noble families enough face. If the noble families on the northern frontier still had their own little plans, then Lin Yuan would not let these noble families on the northern frontier continue to live. However, Lin Yuan could give up the stage and let the northern frontier prince's residents wield the butcher's knife because Lin Yuan had already eliminated the sects and taken away the noble family's land. This made the entire northern frontier people hate the noble families to the core. With these three factors, in addition to the fact that the northern frontier was not big and was known for being bitter and cold, the only noble family that could stand on the stage was the Qiao family. There was no need to mention the rest as they were not difficult to deal with. There was also the southern expedition outside, which was the finishing touch. No noble family's power could cross the southern expedition's line of defense. As long as Li Zhongxing did not stand on the side of the noble families on the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing could just turn around and devour the noble families behind them. He could even use this as an excuse to wipe out the noble families of the northern frontier. No one would have the chance to support the noble families on the northern frontier. The noble families of the northern frontier had these two factors. Even someone as scheming as Zhang Xiu could not think of a way out for the noble families on the northern frontier. Therefore, although the turmoil on the northern frontier had angered Lei Qiusheng had never considered that the noble families on the northern frontier could really change the situation on the northern frontier. Making Lin Yuan take the initiative to call back the southern expedition to suppress the noble families on the northern frontier was just a small interlude in the overall situation. Sooner or later, they would be completely crushed by Lin Yuan. What Zhang Xiu was more worried about was that Lei Qiusheng wanted to learn from Lin Yuan's methods and wipe out the noble families in the Shenwu dynasty. Lin Yuan could do this easily. However, if Lei Qiusheng wanted to do this, then all the sects and noble families in the Shenwu dynasty would not wait for him to kill them. This rebellion that shook the entire dynasty would definitely reach a new level. At that time, the noble families would not only think of attacking their enemies. They would first wipe out the Black Jiao and Lei Qiusheng in the northern frontier. With these two people in the world, the threat to the noble families and sects would definitely increase day by day. If the Black Jiao can do it, why can't I do it? Lei Qiusheng's face instantly darkened. He said coldly, "My dear minister, are you looking down on me?" Zhang Xiu reacted quickly. He reached out and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, what I mean is that although this matter is of great benefit to the country, it needs to be done at the right time. Now that the noble families control the court and the local government, even if your Majesty issues a decree, it will be useless. They will use all kinds of excuses to delay the execution and secretly convey your Majesty's intentions to the rebels, causing the turmoil to become more and more difficult to control." Lei Qiusheng's expression became increasingly gloomy, as if water was about to drip out. He said coldly, "Then what you mean is that I should just watch as these aristocratic families become increasingly disloyal. Once I die, I'll let them erupt and seize this country? Your Majesty's longevity is boundless and your martial prowess is unparalleled. How can you be schemed against by these flies and dogs?" Zhang Xiu shook his head gently. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cold arc. He said coldly, "What I mean is that although we can't do this, we can leave it to the Black Jiao and the Azure Peking to do it. Firstly, they are fighting with these noble families. It's just a matter of whether they do it cleanly or not. With your Majesty's decree, do they dare to not eliminate the root of the problem? Secondly, the two of them also have rebellious intentions. The noble families are not so easy to eliminate. If the two of them do this, they will naturally not be popular in the court in the future. Perhaps the noble families can be used to balance the Black Jiao and the Azure King so that none of them can threaten your majesty's country. Oh, Lei Qiusheng stroked his beard. He was deep in thought. Zhang Xiu was delighted. He struck while the iron was hot and said, the noble families of the south have deep roots. Just the Azure King alone can suppress the rebels. Even if we take the opportunity to eliminate 10 small noble families, we won't be able to make any progress. Moreover, we will lose the support of the people. Although the noble families of the north are easier to deal with than the noble families of the south, the northern territory is so big that the Black Jiao can't take it all. Even if it can, it doesn't have enough money to invest in construction and reform. When the time comes, your majesty can pick the peaches of the Black Jiao with a decree. Chapter 447. It's possible, but, Lei Qiusheng carefully considered for a moment, but his brows were tightly knitted together. Whether it was the Black Jiao or Lei Qiuming, in Lei Qiusheng's eyes, they were not small threats. Both of them were ambitious and ruthless. With the shrewdness of these two, the Xinwu dynasty clearly wanted to use their hands to cleanse the aristocratic families, sects, and other forces. Why would they tarnish their own reputation? They knew that once Lei Qiusheng recovered, he would not treat them well, but they would still obediently follow his orders. After all, Lei Qiusheng had already shown his weakness by asking them to wipe out the rebel army. Under such circumstances, Lin Yuan's actions of sending troops to suppress the rebel army in the north without saying a word was already very generous. Lei Qiuming in the south was still biding his time at this moment. He probably wanted to squeeze a large amount of benefits out of the Xinwu dynasty before he was willing to take action. As a close official of the emperor, Zhang Xiu could naturally see Lei Qiusheng's worries. Moreover, the two of them were close, so he naturally had no scruples. Soon, Zhang Xiu nodded and said, whether the Black Jiao in the north is willing or not, his actions in the northern frontier are enough to make these aristocratic families and sects view him as their number one enemy. If he wants to live a stable life, he cannot have these existences in his territory. Moreover, the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition is Li Zhongsheng, a reserve soldier who left from Shenlin June. Your Majesty, do you think that Li Zhongsheng will treat your secret edict as correct? Once the southern expedition and the aristocratic families in the north have a falling out, that Black Jiao will have to bite the bullet and fight. Speaking up to this point, Zhang Xiu paused. The corner of his mouth suddenly rose, and he said eerily, the one in the south will not fight, but whether he fights or not is not up to him. Although the aristocratic families in the south have rebelled, none of them are afraid of your Majesty's throne. What they want is the control of the sea trade and the bulk of the income. Now that the south is in chaos, no one can gain anything. If your Majesty can show the courage and promise the sea trade to the winner, these people will definitely fight for it. Ugh, Lei Qiusheng fell into deep thought once again. There was no need to elaborate on the Black Jiao situation. In the past, although the aristocratic families and sects were wary of Lei Qiusheng, they hadn't fallen out with him yet. They hadn't reached the point where they would fight with each other. However, the Black Jiao was cleansing the sects and aristocratic families. In a short period of time, the Black Jiao had replaced Lei Qiusheng as the greatest threat to these people. It could even be said that as long as the Black Jiao was still alive, they wouldn't be able to sleep. Conversely, the Black Jiao's attitude towards these people was the same. As for the maritime trade in the south, this was the bulk of the national tax revenue. If it wasn't a last resort, Lei Qiusheng would definitely not be willing to hand it over. If Lei Qiusheng was also part of the rebel army, he could naturally play the game of mutual deception and not admit his mistakes. However, he wasn't part of the rebel army. He was the legitimate emperor of the Xinwu dynasty. The outstanding talents of the aristocratic families from all over the country were gathered under his banner. When he opened his mouth, it was the golden rule. He definitely couldn't take advantage of the situation afterwards. This was Lei Qiusheng's biggest concern now. Otherwise, how could he, the emperor of a country, not think of a plan that even Zhang Xiu could casually come up with? Your Majesty, if you are indecisive, you will be in trouble. However, Zhang Xiu directly knelt in front of Lei Qiusheng and said loudly, if I may be so bold as to say something taboo, the times have changed. Not only are the aristocratic families and sects threatened, but so is the maritime trade. In the past, when we traded with the dynasties that weren't connected to our borders, we could only use this sea route. Not only did it take a long time, but we also had to give up a large amount of profits to the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas every year. Even so, the sea is boundless and there are too many monsters outside the control of the Dragon Palace. We still can't guarantee 100% safety. However, once the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is established, things are completely different. Although the monsters in the Hengduan Mountains aren't easy to deal with, at least they are suppressed by the Monster King Court. They won't be as chaotic as the monsters in the sea. As long as the Black Jiao exists, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce won't be destroyed and the profits from maritime trade will be greatly reduced. As long as the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is willing to pay tribute, the north of the Shenwu dynasty will be our biggest source of income in the future. Although the aristocratic families in the south and the aristocratic families in the north were called aristocratic families, the difference in strength between the two sides was not small. The main reason for this was the existence of maritime trade. This sea route that connected the seven dynasties supported too many aristocratic families. As long as there were enough resources, any kind of weapons, armor, grain, and supplies could be bought from the other six dynasties. Moreover, the land in the south was fertile. Often, the output of the northern frontier was enough for the entire Shenwu dynasty to consume for a year. This was also the reason why the northern frontier was called the land of bitter cold. After all, there were many mountains in the north and the threat of monsters. The land that could be cultivated was really too little. However, the appearance of Lin Yuan completely broke this situation. The land route used by the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not only safe, it was also faster and faster. Moreover, it was faster and on a larger scale. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people coveting it. After all, although the speed of a ship was faster than a carriage, it was inevitable to take a detour on the sea. Other than the chaotic monsters in the sea, the evil cultivators and pirates who lived in remote islands were enough to make every sea route bear the threat of being stabbed at the back. This humble one knows, but, Lei Qiusheng lightly shook his head and said expressionlessly, but if this is the case, wouldn't this humble one's weak spot be firmly grasped by that Black Jiao? This humble one has decided to eliminate the Black Jiao and Lei Qiusheng, these two traitors, after everything is settled. However, you want this humble one to rely on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Doesn't this mean that this humble one must leave the Black Jiao behind? Without the Black Jiao, the Monster King Court would not care about the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Once the Black Jiao was eliminated, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce would definitely collapse. At that time, the maritime trade would also be thrown to the aristocratic families. The entire royal family would be firmly grasped by others. Then this humble one has no other choice. Zhang Xiu did not try to persuade him anymore. He spread out his hands like a hoodlum with a trace of helplessness on his face. Lei Qiusheng was indeed a monarch who could suppress an era. However, his biggest flaw was that he was headstrong and self-opinionated. He did not listen to the advice of others and hoped to control everything in his hands. He wanted to become the most powerful monarch since the founding of the human countries. This way, when people talked about him, they would say that Lei Qiusheng was a monarch throughout the ages and not a thief who plotted a rebellion to sit on the throne. Facing such a monarch, even someone like Zhang Xiu, who was close to Lei Qiusheng, did not dare to say too much. He could only give his own opinion and let Lei Qiusheng slowly ponder over it. When Lei Qiusheng understood, no matter what order he gave, as his subjects, they had no choice but to carry it out unconditionally. Chapter 448. Li Zhongsheng's mental state had changed. Zhang Xiu and Lei Qiusheng's comments. Li Zhong wasn't informed of these two major events that would affect the future situation in time. At this moment, Li Zhong had already arrived at Taicang City with 100,000 guards. He was wearing a golden armor with a red cloak on his back. At this moment, Li Zhong was riding on a tall horse. No one would be able to tell that he was a scholar who excelled in both politics and strategy. Instead, he looked more like an experienced general who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Taicang City's position in the northern frontier was definitely very special. This was because the climate here wasn't bitter, and the temperature didn't change much. The surrounding land was also very fertile, and it had always been the northern frontier's main source of food. At the same time, it was also the northern frontier's largest warehouse. For example, the feies that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't in a hurry to sell were all stored in Taicang City's official warehouse. Although the other gathering places had granaries, they were only enough for temporary disaster relief. Most of the food was still stored in Taicang City. The northern frontier's aristocratic family's rebellion wasn't considered brilliant, but it was definitely a wise move to take Taicang City hostage. This was because if something went wrong with Taicang City's storage, the entire northern frontier would be affected. After all, the various official warehouses were only enough for the local people to eat for half a month. Once Taicang City's food couldn't be transferred out, they could only use the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to buy large amounts of food from the other 6 empires. However, such a large-scale purchase of rations would undoubtedly make those with keen senses sniff out an opportunity. Perhaps when the time came for these rations to arrive, countless scavengers would come tearing at them with their fangs. It was also because of Taicang City's importance that Li Zhong's first stop was Taicang City after he led his troops out. However, he didn't expect to see a pre-built military camp outside the city. Soon, Luo Su, who was covered in bandages and wearing a flying fish robe, walked out of the military camp with a smile. He said in a deep voice, "I didn't expect His Highness to personally lead the troops to reinforce us. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you." The words were polite, but when Luo Su said it, there was more or less a hint of ridicule. After all, it was a big taboo for the king of the northern frontier to leave Shunning City with his subordinates. Although there was no explicit rule, this rule had become an unspoken rule in most people's minds after Hu Yan, the king of the northern frontier who was almost a puppet. Therefore, Li Zhong should be overseeing the northern frontier at the moment, and not taking the risk to personally come to the northern frontier, not to mention running into an acquaintance like Luo Su. In an instant, the atmosphere had become extremely awkward. What was even more awkward was that Luo Su, as the commander-in-chief of the Genie Guards, had the power to supervise hundreds of officials. If the Xinwu dynasty had the final say in the northern frontier, then Li Zhong's behavior would be regarded as overstepping his bounds, and Luo Su had no right to punish him. However, the northern frontier was under Lin Yuan's control. Li Zhong's behavior was tantamount to running into Luo Su's hands. It was really too much of a coincidence. After all, although the king of the northern frontier had the title of king, the real ruler of the northern frontier was Lin Yuan. Therefore, even if the king of the northern frontier got rid of the title of puppet in Li Zhong's hands, he was still only the head of hundreds of officials, far from the real king. Li Zhong waved his sleeves lightly and said coldly, "Commander-in-Chief, don't tell me you're not waiting for me in Taicang City? After all, you and I both know what that person wants. Wouldn't it save you a lot of trouble if I delivered myself to your door?" Lin Yuan wanted the only authority in the northern frontier to be the new law of the northern frontier. Therefore, even if there was a king above, he had to make a huge change of the king under the law. Li Zhong was promoted to the position of the king of the northern frontier, and he was originally responsible for this. Naturally, he wouldn't pretend to be innocent and try to get rid of the blame. However, being ridiculed by Luo Su in front of his face like this, Li Zhong felt a little embarrassed. "Don't beat around the bush. What's the situation?" Li Zhong saw Luo Su open his mouth, and before he could speak, he took the initiative to interrupt Luo Su. Luo Su was silent for a moment and didn't argue anymore. He turned around and pointed in the direction of Taicang City, and said coldly, they've set up barricades and other traps and obstacles at all the entrances and exits of the streets. It's impossible to force our way through. Moreover, almost all of the houses on both sides are private soldiers of the northern frontier aristocratic families. If we can't deal with them, we'll lose more than 30% of our people before we reach the barricades. Although the city walls of the northern frontier cities had been removed, this didn't mean that the cities on the northern frontier were easy to attack. Since ancient times, whether it was attacking or defending, attacking the city walls was often only the first stage. The last stage, which was also the bloodiest stage, was that after breaking through the siege, they still had to enter the city to search for the remaining soldiers and defeated generals. This was the so-called street battle. This kind of battle mode where the advantage in numbers couldn't be fully utilized and could only be fought at close range was like a huge meat grinder. It was crueler than any other kind of battle, because once you entered the street battle and encountered the enemy, you would be surrounded by people in front and behind you. You couldn't run even if you wanted to, so you could only grit your teeth and fight. If your injuries were too serious, the only outcome was to fall in a dark alley and wait for death. Li Zhong's eyes narrowed slightly, and his mind spun quickly. After a moment, a bitter smile appeared on his face. The northern frontier prince's mansion had the advantage. At least in terms of the number of soldiers and the degree of the elites, the northern frontier prince's mansion had completely defeated the aristocratic families of the northern frontier. But after entering the street battle, the advantage in numbers didn't have much of an effect. If they fought well, they would only be able to exchange 1 for 1, or 1 for 2. But if the two sides pulled their horses to the wilderness and arranged their soldiers in formations, they would be able to defeat the aristocratic family's private soldiers without much effort. But the northern frontier prince's mansion didn't have an absolute advantage. For example, the Taizong granary was still in the hands of the aristocratic families of the northern frontier. Every entrance and exit of the streets had been set up with traps and obstacles, and a large number of aristocratic families' private soldiers were hidden in the houses. The other side was building a temporary position comparable to a tortoise shell. No matter what method Li Zhong used, the possibility of the other side giving up their advantage and coming out to fight in the field was not high. What do you think? Li Zhong couldn't come up with any ideas at the moment, so he could only look at Luo Su. Although this person usually did things by hook or by crook and had a reckless personality, when faced with such a cowardly opponent, Luo Su's method might be much better than those in military books. Luo Su shrugged and said helplessly, "If you want me to take command, I will transfer a batch of siege weapons, load them with flint, and bombard the defensive area they built. I don't believe they can still hold on." Nonsense. Li Zhong frowned and scolded in a low voice when he heard this. Chapter 449. Ha! Luo Su's expression changed as he continued with a look of disdain. "You were still in school when I was leading the army. Now, all the construction projects in the northern frontier are going on at the same time. Here, being a civilian makes more money than being a soldier, and it's also a lot safer. And yet, Lord Dragon King forbade us from forcibly conscripting soldiers. How are you going to defend the northern frontier if you lose the people you have? Are you going to count on those monsters? If this is an enemy's camp, then you're right." Li Zhong looked at Luo Su and shook his head gently, saying in a deep voice, "But this is Taizong. Other than the rebellious clans, there are also millions of civilians. I don't know if the defense line built by the clans at the northern frontier will collapse if you continue to bombard it, but the image of the northern frontier lord's residence as a benevolent ruler will definitely crumble." Luo Su waved his hand in disgust and walked toward the camp. Although he did not have any bad feelings toward Li Zhong, as the former commander of the garrison army in mountain-blocking city, he knew very well that all the mercy he showed during the war would only bring pain to himself. Back when they were fighting against the demon beasts, they had to give up countless of their fellow soldiers and brothers in order to stabilize the front line. But now, they were fighting against a group of beasts in human skin. Why should they be so restrained? If it were not for the fact that the siege weapons in the northern frontier were all under the control of the northern frontier lord's residence, and that no one was allowed to use them without the letter and seal of the northern frontier lord, Luo Su felt that he would have taken Taizong City a long time ago. There must be a way. There must be a way. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su's back as he walked further and further away. He slowly closed his eyes and began to recall the topographic map of the entire Taizong City. While he directly rejected Luo Su's idea of using siege weapons to bombard Taizong City, that did not mean that he was going to grit his teeth and let his men build a path into the city with blood and flesh. Li Zhong opened his eyes all of a sudden after a while and bellowed, "All cultivators above level 8 of the airborne realm are to report to me right now. We will begin attacking the enemy forces in Taizong City in an hour." As soon as Li Zhong finished speaking, the two guards beside him quickly ran off. One of them ran towards the flag officer of the Royal Guards, while the other ran towards the camp that the Imperial Guards and the Northern Battlefront Army had set up beforehand. An hour later, one by one, the soldiers, who had changed into black night clothes, with short swords and crossbows on their waists, walked out of the camp in a single file. Their zhenqi circulated in their bodies, and within a few moments, they had already approached Taizong City. However, the private soldiers of the clans who were ready to go were surprised to find that those men in black, who were at least at level 8 of the airborne realm, were not there to clear the way for the rest of the troops. They jumped onto the roofs of the houses as soon as they entered Taizong City. The private soldiers of the clans who were hiding in the houses on both sides of the street were dumbfounded right away. There was no way they were going to poke the roofs with their weapons. If the roofs were to collapse, wouldn't they be the ones to suffer? However, the clans were not all good-for-nothings. Seeing that someone had bypassed the street battlefield that they had prepared, they immediately pulled the reserve troops up and began to distribute arrows to shoot at those men in black, who did not play by the rules. However, they did not get much out of it. After all, the enemy was a cultivator at the late stage of the airborne realm. Be it in terms of strength or speed, those mortal evolution state soldiers were no match for them. After a round of arrow rain, they did not get anything out of it other than causing some scratches to the few men in black at the front. On the other hand, the men in black took out their crossbows and fired at them in unison, taking out 700 to 800 lives in the blink of an eye. Idiots, find cover and reload. Keep shooting. You must, an aristocratic family's patriarch angrily commanded his family's private army, but before he could finish speaking, a whistling crossbow arrow fiercely nailed into his forehead. For a moment, all the clan lords were silent out of fear. They stared at the black-robed men on the rooftops with burning eyes. However, no one dared to jump out and command their troops. They could only tacitly agree that they would follow the original plan. After all, that crossbow arrow wasn't a stray arrow. It was aimed at their command point. A clan leader wearing a gray robe stood behind a wall and said loudly, "I know what they are going to do. The battlefield now is the street battle that we have chosen. With the quality of the Northern Frontier's army, although they can win against us in a street battle, they definitely won't be willing to suffer such a loss. These men in black are going to mobilize our army and make us fight them in open terrain." A burly patriarch of an aristocratic family spat on the ground and said coldly, "F***ck your mother's fart. I will stay here and not move. See if their main force can come in. Do you think they can fool us with this kind of trick? I'm afraid you have no choice but to move even if you don't want to." An old man who looked to be in his 60s or 70s sighed. "Look at the movements of these men in black. Where do you think they are going?" "The granary," the burly clan leader exclaimed. His face suddenly became gloomy. Because of the special geography of the northern frontier, it was not only the Shenwu dynasty that fought against the evil beasts, but also these aristocratic families. After all, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier who mainly relied on the materials of the evil beasts to make a living were definitely more hated by the evil beasts than the Castellan's mansion. Therefore, these aristocratic families were not unfamiliar with leading troops to battle. Otherwise, they would not have been able to see through Li Zhong's intentions so quickly. After all, the reason why Taizong City dared to turn their camp into a turtle shell and drag the northern region lord's palace's army into a street fight was because they had Taizong City's granary in their hands. The northern region lord's palace could surround Pingwang and Anmin city without attacking to minimize their losses. However, Taicang city was determined to win because most of the northern region's food was stored in Taicang city. The people who were trapped in Taicang city weren't afraid of running out of food. However, if the northern region lord's palace didn't have any food to eat, it would be a disaster. As the hope of the entire northern region, although Taicang granary was built in the eastern city district, it was surrounded by empty land for tens of thousands of miles. Only near the granary were there 100 or so houses for the guards on duty to guard the granary. Moreover, they were all one-story houses with a small area. Standing at the door, one could see what these houses were like. Although such a place was inside the city, it was more than enough to be used as a battlefield. Once in such an open place, how could these mortal evolution state aristocratic families' private soldiers fight against the Northern Frontier Army? Chapter 450. Why don't we invite those clans over? A clan lord with a curly beard looked around and asked with a grim look on his face. To put it bluntly, the aristocratic families gathered in the outer city were almost the weakest in the entire northern region. They were placed there to serve as cannon fodder and stop the regular army of the Lord of the Northern region. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been helpless against a group of men in black who were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. They had no choice but to cover their heads and hide behind cover. I don't think they have the time. The clan lord in a grey robe shook his head gently and sighed. That Li Zhong or whatever has set up a government office in name only, and the manpower of the local government has increased by more than 3 times. Those clans have a hard time suppressing the local government, the Association of the Demon Emperor, and the embroidered uniform guards. Even if we go to them, we might not be able to get them to do anything. Otherwise what? The burly clan lord smirked and said coldly, "You don't want us to do it ourselves, do you?" The clan lord in a grey robe rolled his eyes twice and sneered. "I think you're not very smart, but you're not stupid either. Think about it, if the clans of the northern frontier and the northern frontier were to fight, who would have a better chance of winning? This is especially true for all of you here. None of you are considered top-notch figures among the clans of the northern frontier. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been reduced to being cannon fodder with me. Although I have the name of a clan, I only have a few dozen acres of land under my name, and the annual harvest I get is not even as good as what I get when I go on a trip to the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce with the big caravans. Now, those clans can't take this lying down. They don't want the northern frontier to take their thousands of acres of land, so they encourage us to rebel and then leave us here to die. This is not right." As soon as he finished speaking, the clan lords of the smaller clans began to whisper. As the old saying goes, the ass decides the head. If those present were all clan heads of large aristocratic families, they would consider that their farmlands could be used to raise private soldiers. In times of chaos, it was not impossible for them to encircle a piece of land and wait for the imperial court to enlist them. However, those present today were almost all clan heads of small aristocratic families who were used as cannon fodder by large aristocratic families. The income they earned from farmlands was only enough to feed a family of 100 people. They could not afford to raise a large-scale private army, not to mention encircling a piece of land during the chaos. Therefore, the reason why the aristocratic families were rebelling was not attractive to them at all. The reason why they were here was because they were threatened by the aristocratic families. Otherwise, who would be willing to be cannon fodder? That may be the case, but do you have any other ideas? The burly family head sneered and said in a strange tone, "We are rebelling right now. Have you ever seen a king who can tolerate his subordinates rebelling before surrendering? Humans were strange creatures. There were times when they were very assertive and would not listen to anyone's advice. But there were also times when they did not have their own opinions at all. They were so easily swayed that they would believe whatever others said. Those present were all clan heads of the small family. When they heard the grey-robed family head's words, they felt that they did not want to rebel. Wasn't it not worth it to give up their lives for the sake of the aristocratic families? But when they heard the burly family head's words, they felt that the possibility of them surrendering was not high. After all, Lei Fan and Hu Yen were considered to be the old generals by the Black Jiao's side. Wasn't it because they had violated these taboos and were kicked out just like that? They were now standing on the side of the rebels. Seeing that they could not defeat the northern frontier prince's mansion, they were going to surrender. Even if Li Zhong was willing to take them under his command now, when the trouble at hand was settled, would Li Zhong still have a reason to let them go? If all of you were to go out and surrender just like that, you will not be able to escape death. But now is such a good opportunity. If you can release the power of the various government offices and assist the regular army outside the city to take down Taicang, it will be a great merit. If we have such merit in our hands, even if Li Zhong wants our lives, he will have to first ask for Lord Dragon King's permission. The gray-robed family head's lips curled up slightly and he said with a cold smile, Lord Dragon King has no intention of completely annihilating us aristocratic families. If we are all exterminated, who is going to help the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to do business in the south? It is all those aristocratic families who are not willing to let Lord Dragon King take away their land, and that is why they have joined forces to create such a ruckus. Instead, they have put us in a difficult position. Among the aristocratic families in the northern frontier, there were the Qiao family who clenched their teeth and stuck with Lin Yuan. There were also the large aristocratic families who clenched their teeth and wanted to fight to the death with the northern frontier prince's mansion. But there were not many family heads who had the courage to bet the lives of their entire family on this battle. Most of them were like this gray-robed family head, planning to stay for a while and see the situation before deciding which side to stand on. This method seemed to have a high chance of success. At least they could bet their chips on the winner. But everyone knew that once they were in this quagmire, it would be difficult to get out. If they did not have enough merit and sincerity, even if they bet correctly, they would be punished by Li Zhong one by one. Because if they put themselves in his shoes, if they were sitting on the throne of the northern frontier prince, they would not want the aristocratic families to once again become a big threat to the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. Any existence that did not wholeheartedly submit to them had to be eliminated as soon as possible. You tell us first, what should we do? If your plan is good, I can bet with you. If we bet correctly this time, the good days that belong to us in the northern frontier will arrive. The burly family head licked his lips. It was obvious that the gray-robed family head's suggestion was extremely tempting to him. The gray-robed family head crossed his arms in front of his chest. With an unfathomable smile on his face, he said, First of all, we will let these black-robed men go directly to the granary. Then we will split into two groups. One group will go outside and beg for surrender. At the same time, we will explain our intentions and let them send some experts to infiltrate into our group. After that, we will go to the various government offices and say that the northern frontier prince's mansion has gathered experts and we are unable to stop them. They are already heading in the direction of the granary. When the time comes. Before the gray-robed family head could finish his words, the bearded family head interrupted him and asked, It's easy for you to say. Don't you know what the big aristocratic families are like? They are already unable to suppress the power of the various government offices in Taicang City. Originally, they planned to rely on us to delay the army of the northern frontier prince's mansion for a period of time so that they can gradually eat away at the people in the government offices. Good fellow, you just accepted the battle and directly reported that you are unable to defeat them. Do you think they will let us go? Chapter 451. Why are you so noisy? Don't tell me you're scared. The gray-robed family master coldly sized up the curled bearded family master and sneered, Now that the situation is like this, if we don't want to be cannon fodder, we must hug the thighs of the northern frontier Wangfu. If we want to hug the thighs of the northern frontier Wangfu, the only way is to completely offend the northern frontier aristocratic families. For someone like you who doesn't do anything and just wants to watch them fight, you can just wait to be settled. Speaking up to this point, the gray-robed family master pointed at the surrounding family masters and said with a cold face, I don't have any other intentions. I just want to find a way out for my brothers and instantly take revenge on those aristocratic families who used us as cannon fodder. If you guys aren't willing, fine. Let's have a fight first so that we won't drag anyone down." As his voice fell, the surrounding area was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. After all, even though they were members of the northern frontier aristocratic families, they were at the lowest level. Not to mention that the northern frontier Wangfu could directly crush the so-called northern frontier aristocratic families in terms of strength. Even if both sides were evenly matched, they still hoped that the Wangfu would win. After all, as long as Lin Yuan existed in the northern frontier, they would be able to reap huge benefits from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. And if the aristocratic families controlled the northern frontier, it would only cause these small and medium-sized aristocratic families to gradually fall apart. Furthermore, at this point in time, even if there were really stubborn people who thought that this matter was related to the survival of the northern frontier aristocratic families, they would have to reconsider. No one was willing to die, and there weren't many people who were noble enough to be willing to die for others. Whoever interrupts again, I'll twist his neck off. The burly family master swept a glance at the surrounding people who were silent like cicadas in winter. He smiled at the gray-robed family master and said, "Brother, I'll do whatever you say." "You didn't finish your words just now. What do you want us to do after we report this to the Yamen?" "Humph," the gray-robed family's lord coldly snorted. A cold light flickered in his eyes as he indifferently said, "They'll send some of their experts to the front line with us after we've delivered the message. They'll try to snipe those black-robed men's steps. Those who've gone to the Yamen are bound to have a quarrel with them. Now is the time when they need people. They won't kill anyone. However, they'll certainly say some unpleasant words. So, take advantage of this gap. Those who've gone out to beg for surrender must hurry up and inform the other side of my plan." 15 minutes later. After receiving the message from his subordinate, Li Zhong stroked his chin and sneered. He had made a special trip to suppress the northern frontier aristocratic families. He didn't expect that the aristocratic families would have internal strife even before the official start. He just wanted to lead people to the granary to change the terrain to a more open battlefield suitable for them to fight. Let Luo Su send some embroidered uniform guards who are good at hiding their breath to go back with them. Also, let those people in front stop the attack, lest those people come out and think that the family masters of those small aristocratic families are deceiving them. But, it's okay to go easy on them, but too much will seem fake. Let them know what to do. Li Zhong sat in the commander's tent and slowly read out his order. Luo Su nodded repeatedly, as if he had thought of something. Li Zhong waved his hand and dismissed the messenger in front of him. Only then did his eyes fall on Luo Su, waiting for him to continue. "I always thought that although the Dragon King's methods were extraordinary, compared to the real heroes, he was still a little lacking. Because every time the Dragon King's chess piece was placed, he was always ready to use force to get the situation back on track when it was out of his control. But today, before we even entered Taicang City, the big aristocratic families and the small aristocratic families were forced into conflict because of us. Only now did I understand why the Dragon King wanted me to pay attention to these 3 cities. Almost all the big aristocratic families have countless fertile fields. For the sake of their family's future, it's normal for them to fall out with us. But the small aristocratic families obviously don't have such benefits. They will only stand on the opposite side of us, purely under the coercion of the big aristocratic families. If they can gain the upper hand, it's fine. But once they are forced into a desperate situation, their past dirty deeds will be exposed. Of course, the aristocratic families have offended the Dragon King's reverse scale. But at this point, they still know to atone for their sins by using the heads of the big aristocratic families in exchange for their own survival. Whether it's these quick-witted talents or the small but prosperous families behind them, for us, it's all beneficial. Luo Su's eyes narrowed slightly, and he smiled. More importantly, keeping these small aristocratic families for our use is tantamount to setting an example for the small aristocratic families outside. If the aristocratic families outside have a conflict with us, after this chaos, we only need to see how carefree and comfortable these small aristocratic families in the northern frontier are, and they won't stand on the wrong side again. Your flattery is not bad. It's a pity that the Dragon King isn't here. Li Zhong choked on Luo Su's words, and then said indifferently, "This is a job that can lead to death. As the commander-in-chief of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, don't you plan to say a few words to the selected Embroidered Uniform Guard?" Luo Su spread out his hands indifferently and said indifferently, "What's there to say? It's not like you don't know the Embroidered Uniform Guard's initial criteria for recruiting spies. The most basic point is that you can't take your life seriously. You have to have the ability to lie flat on the ground and not get up even if the wheels of a speeding carriage are a centimeter away from your head. Only then can you be selected to serve in the Embroidered Uniform Guard." This, Li Zhong looked at Luo Su with a blank face. He didn't expect that the first batch of people recruited by the Embroidered Uniform Guard would all be lunatics who didn't take their lives seriously. Yes, although these people usually looked normal, if a person could disregard life and death and still roll around in the world of mortals for fame and fortune, then that person was 100% a lunatic. Luo Su drank the tea in his cup in one gulp and said with a smile, "It's just a test of courage. You haven't seen the training courses of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. If a normal person doesn't have this kind of courage, after half a month of training, they'll either become a lunatic or a fool. What's more, the Embroidered Uniform Guard's work isn't clean. Whatever the higher-ups want, we have to ask. Even the slightest bit won't do. When faced with those stubborn people, we can only use torture. Tell me, if a person doesn't take his own life seriously, would he take the lives of others seriously?" Li Zhong subconsciously shivered. Although he knew that Luo Su was referring to the first generation of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, with such a group of perverted seniors, he could already see a corner of how difficult the days of the youths who would fill in the positions of the Embroidered Uniform Guard would be. Chapter 452. D***Mnet, are you all F***King useless? A family leader whose face was flushed red grabbed the collar of the gray-robed family leader and said coldly, "We all left our private soldiers stationed in the outer city, and we didn't let you idiots personally go into battle. You can't even command the battle well? Even if you use your life, can't you stop those black-clothed people for a while?" The gray-robed family leader's face was smeared with mud, and he looked battered and exhausted. He smiled bitterly and said, "Boss Lin, it's not that we didn't try our best. Thousands of black-clothed people came out together, and all of them were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. Not to mention those private soldiers who were used as cannon fodder. Even if we went up personally, we wouldn't be able to withstand a round of their charge." The original Northern Frontier private soldiers were not much different from the regular army because at that time, whether it was the city lord's office or the Northern Frontier families, they did not have much money and food to feed the army. However, after Lin Yuan established the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, the money and food invested in the construction of the regular army was not on the same level as the aristocratic families. In addition to a large number of spiritual items, after Li Zhong and Luo Su joined forces, about 150,000 troops were almost all at the airborne realm. Even if they were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm and above, they had directly gathered tens of thousands of people. On the other hand, the quality of the family's private soldiers was somewhat unsightly. Even airborne realm warriors were able to stand on equal footing with these small clans, let alone late-stage airborne realm warriors. Furthermore, all of them were in the ranks of the main clans, which meant that they were not people that these small clan leaders could command. However, the combat prowess of both sides was there for all to see. Airborne realm warriors were able to hover in the air for a short period of time, and they could even use the air to jump. While they were traveling on the roof, the mortal evolution warriors below had to think of ways to build ladders to climb up. By the time they made it up, those people on the roof were nowhere to be seen. Even if they were able to catch the enemy's follow-up forces, it was hard to say whether they were lucky or unlucky. After all, they were fighting on a narrow roof, and they also had to consider the roof's load-bearing capacity. Usually, it would be 10 or so mortal evolution states fighting 7 or 8 airborne states. In comparison, they had no chance of winning at all. Of course, Although the gray-robed clan leader knew that the enemy had at least 8,000, if not 10,000, late-stage airborne realm cultivators, when he went to the yamen to ask for help, he could only say a number that was not too exaggerated. Otherwise, he would have directly said that there were 10,000 late-stage airborne realm cultivators. At that time, the enemy would not think about how to continue to consolidate the defense line, but would instead think about running for their lives. Again, the aristocratic family's private soldiers could fight in the streets, and they could also use the street battles to buy enough time for the northern frontier to fall into chaos, or wait for the other two backup plans to take effect. But if they were asked to gather their men and horses to fight against the northern frontier's regular army, they obviously didn't have the guts to do so. Thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators? Only then did the complexion of the clan's master, whose face was flushed red, clear up a little. He loosened the collar of the clan's master, and said in a deep voice, "Then, what's the meaning of you coming here? Don't tell me that you're going to ask me to send people to support you." It took a lot of effort for me to be able to suppress these lunatics in the yamen. If I were to send more people away, the entire line of defense might collapse. They naturally knew how the battle of the cannon fodder outside was. Not to mention thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators, even if there were 200 or 300 of them, they could easily tear their line of defense. Now, the men in black outside had yet to rush in, which was enough to prove that the private soldiers in front were already using their lives to delay the enemy's new advance. Big Brother Lin, I'm not worrying for nothing. These thousands of men in black can be strong, but they can also be weak. If they were to enter the city, they would go straight to the stronghold of the Association of the Demon Emperor or the various yamens. I'm sure I have nothing to worry about, because the elites of the various clan leaders are gathered here. Even if they were to rush in, they would only end up with their heads bleeding. There's no way they could threaten us at all. At this point, the gray-robed clan's master took a deep breath and pointed in the direction of the eastern city. He asked, "But what if they don't care about the lives of these people in the city and go straight to the granary?" At this time, Big Brother Lin was slightly stunned. He immediately shook his head decisively and cursed, "Bullsh *T, there are still troops under their command in the city. If they were to rush in, it should be a small force. The main force will still be blocked by the streets. If those little rats that rush in want to do something, they must first liberate these people in the city. If they don't come to save people, it can only mean that there's a traitor among us." At this point, Big Brother Lin reached out and patted the gray-robed clan's master on the shoulder. He sneered and said, "Don't you think so?" The gray-robed clan's master sighed and said in a low voice, "Big Brother Lin, what do you think we're doing? Are we children playing house? We're rebelling. If you're not careful, you can lose your head. How can you be so careless? Do you know who's leading the troops outside the city? One is Li Zhong, who has single-handedly schemed against my aristocratic family, and the other is Luo Su, who has completely exposed the epidemic food plan. With these two fiends together, do you think that we will not become traitors? Do you think there is a way to survive?" Big Brother Lin deliberated for a moment and didn't continue to be entangled in the topic of traitors. The gray-robed clan's master shook his head again and sighed. "I originally thought that Hu Yen had suffered a big loss at Li Zhong's hands, which caused our clan to lose the hearts of the people. You arrogant clan's masters would sound the alarm for yourselves and treat Li Zhong as a real opponent. But now, it seems that you haven't learned your lesson and still don't treat Li Zhong seriously, right?" Speaking up to here, he raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the granary and said in a low voice, "The food we're eating now is all transferred from the granary. Although the surrounding clans didn't participate in the operation, they've sent all their private armies over. With so many people eating, how many days does Big Brother Lin think your family's private storehouse can last them?" Big Brother Lin silently calculated for a moment. His eyes revealed a touch of panic and said in a low voice, "If something happens to the granary, our food can only last for 7 days. In terms of time, we're much more urgent than the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion." The gray-robed clan's master nodded heavily and said bitterly, "Now Li Zhong obviously wants to send people to occupy the granary first. Big Brother, if you don't give people here, you won't give people in other places either. If the outer defense line can't hold, I can only let them pass. The battlefield will change from the streets and alleys that we've carefully selected to the tens of thousands of miles of open space near the granary. Big Brother, how many people do you think will have left after one round of assault? At this point, even if Big Brother Lin has a heart of stone, he has to consider whether he can keep his head. Chapter 453. 30,000 miles away from Taicang City, on the top of a mountain. Ding Zai was wearing a sapphire blue robe with a wide belt with red spider patterns around his waist. His long hair hung down to his waist. Although Ding Zai didn't look much different from before in terms of facial features, his temperament was completely different. It was as if he was a different person. The aura around him flowed with the faint sound of wind and thunder. It seems that our demon emperor is sure to win. Ding Zai looked at the coiled-up black Jiao in front of him. A faint smile appeared on his face as he took the initiative to break the silence. Lin Yuan slowly turned his head. There was no color in his different-colored eyes. He said indifferently, "If there is no problem on your side, this king won't lose." With such a huge gap, the only winning hand for the northern frontier clans is Kong Lezin. Other than that, any other path is a dead end. Otherwise, I can continue to suppress the northern frontier. Why should I give up this stage for them to fight? Heh. Ding Zai laughed dryly and said in a deep voice, "Unfortunately, Lord Demon Emperor overestimated himself, and similarly overestimated me. I came all the way to the Upper Deer Association and didn't even meet a decent expert." Whoosh. With a sharp sound of wind breaking, Lin Yuan, who was coiled up in front of Ding Zai, suddenly appeared in front of him. The two looked at each other for a while. Lin Yuan slowly opened his mouth and sneered, "Is your Upper Deer Association still playing tricks? If you can't do what I ask, you will definitely not return to the northern frontier to die." As the sound of his voice faded, an incomparably majestic aura gushed out from his body. The might that belonged to the dragon race was like a mountain that could suppress the world, ruthlessly crushing down on Ding Zai. Under the pressure of Lin Yuan's terrifying aura, Ding Zai took a few steps back. He took a deep breath and said with a red face, "Since Demon Emperor knows about the Heaven Gate, then you should know that for us, any combat power is very precious. The higher-ups feel that you have the potential to become one of them in the future, so they are willing to make peace for you. However, Kong Lezin is now one of those people. They naturally won't send experts to kill Kong Lezin for you." As the sound of his voice faded, Lin Yuan's dragon might still didn't have the slightest intention of restraining it. It pressed down on Ding Zai's body inch by inch, as if wanting to crush him into meat paste. "Kong Lezin will soon withdraw from the northern frontier. This is what you should have thought of before we set off." Ding Zai's face was flushed red, his chest was heaving up and down violently, but the amount of oxygen he could breathe in was very little. Only now did he realize that this black Jiao was unbelievably strong. Beast kings at the Mountain Lord level weren't rare, but Ding Zai had never seen a beast king at the Mountain Lord level who could give him such a strong sense of pressure like Lin Yuan. "Yes, I did think of it. So, from the beginning, I didn't count on your Upper Deer Association." Lin Yuan's suppression on Ding Zai loosened slightly. A faint smile flashed across his different-colored eyes as he continued, "I just want you and Kong Lezin to think that I have placed my hopes on your Upper Deer Association." "You, what did you do? Lunatic." Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a dumbfounded expression. His face even started to distort. Lin Yuan condescendingly looked at Ding Zai, whose face was distorted, and said word by word, "I just want to tell all of you, from today onwards, whoever stretches their claws towards me, I will dare to chop off their claws. What happened to the Fire Kirin back then, will be what happened to Kong Lezin today." Kong Lezin was the guardian of the Heaven Gate. No matter what position he had among those top bosses, he was extremely rare in this circle where combat strength was scarce. If Lin Yuan wanted to resolve this matter through peaceful diplomacy, then the best result would be for him to cause a storm in the northern frontier and almost overturn the entire northern frontier. Then, he would leave as if nothing had happened. If Kong Lezen could do this today, it would be the same if someone else came tomorrow. At least before Lin Yuan grew to their level, there would not be the slightest change. As long as there was a conflict between the two sides, the one who would suffer in the end would definitely be Lin Yuan. And to put it bluntly, the Sky Martial Continent could be said to be extremely afraid of the things on the other side of the Heaven Gate. They were strictly guarding it and were not willing to let anything from outside the Heaven Gate enter the Sky Martial Continent. This kind of abnormal defense had been maintained since ancient times until now. Even in the current cultivation world, the Void Realm was already the ceiling. To put it nicely, it was called being cautious. To put it bluntly, these people were just scared by some bad things on the other side. But they had completely forgotten that the cultivation techniques they were practicing today also came from the other side of the Heaven Gate. Lin Yuan did not have any fear of the other side of the Heaven Gate. Whether it was a psychological effect or not, or what he had seen and heard after coming to this world, Lin Yuan was at least 60% sure that even if the other side of the Heaven Gate was not the world he was familiar with, it should be a similar world. As long as he could find the way, sooner or later he would be able to return to his original world and put down all the blood feud. You can't do that. Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a twisted face and growled, I don't care what method you use, but you have to know that Kong Lezen is a member of the Heaven Gate's Guardian. He is an indispensable fighting force of our Sky Martial Continent. If you kill him, no one will be able to save you, this daring demonic beast. Oh. Lin Yuan raised his eyelids slightly and said casually, since I have the ability to kill Kong Lezen, I have the ability to kill others. Do you think those almighty experts above Kong Lezen are the same as him and can walk away casually? Or is it that they can send several existences on the level of Kong Lezen at once? Ding Zai was silent, obviously he did not know how to refute Lin Yuan's words. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes, and he sneered, all your madness now is telling me that the Sky Martial Continent cannot afford the loss of one Kong Lezen, but I can tell you that today, Kong Lezen will definitely die. After he dies, no one will touch me, and there will be people rushing to curry favor with me. Because in the future, this king is destined to go to the Heaven Gate, and is destined to stand at a higher place than Kong Lezen. With one Kong Lezen dead, only the four alliance behind him will feel a little heartache. You talk to this king about the big picture, and this king will also talk to you about the big picture, how about it? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.